Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the RAISE and the Grandparent Advisory Council joint meeting. I also want to welcome members of the public who have tuned in to watch today's joint meeting of the RAISE and Grandparent Advisory Councils. I'd like to call this meeting to order on behalf of Allison Barkoff, the chair, and the acting administrator of the Administration for Community Living. Allison is in another meeting and is running a bit late, so will be joining us very shortly. Today, before we get into the business of the meeting today, I just want to acknowledge what a momentous occasion it is in that the councils, with the support of the Administration for Community Living and other key partners who you're going to be hearing from a little bit later, have just delivered to Congress and released publicly the 2022 National Strategy to Support Family Caregivers. We have a very full and I think exciting agenda for today. And as I just mentioned, Allison Barkoff will be joining us in a few minutes as she's wrapping up another meeting. Before we jump to the business of the day, I'd like to ask Cheryl and/or Chantal to do a roll call. When your name is called, if you could please turn on your mic and your camera and just say here or present, and we'll see who's here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Greg. And we know that our chair, Allison Barkoff, will join us later. Co-chairs for both councils, Jaya Lent.
Hello, here. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Ethlyn McQueen Gibson.
I am present.
Nancy Murray.
I'm here.
Casey Shillum.
I'm here.
Alan Stevens.
Present.
Thank you. And now we'll call the non-federal members for both councils. Ben Bledsoe. Joe Caldwell.
I'm here.
Diane Caradu.
Here.
Martha Crowther. James Cheeley. Patrick Donovan.
I am here. Thank you.
Gisela Dolan. And I believe Gisela will be joining us later. Gail Engel.
I'm here.
Brenda Gallant is unable to join us today. Dr. Catherine Alicia Georges.
Here.
Sarah Hedden. Bet Hoxie.
Present.
Tony Cleckley. Yvonne Lee. Linda Miller. Rhonda Montgomery.
Here.
James Murtha.
Present.
Sharon Olson.
Present.
Thank you. Sarah Smalls.
Present.
Charlotte Stevenson.
Present.
Deborah Stone Walls.
Happy to be here.
Teresa Tanos.
I'm here.
Carol Zernial.
Here.
Wonderful. Now we'll move to our federal members. Michelle Archuleta. Elizabeth Sweet.
I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Sonia Begay.
Present.
Taffy Campaign. Katie Campana will join us later today. Bruce Fink.
I'm here. Present.
Melissa Harris. Jody Sumaraki.
Present.
Liliana Chakrabarti.
Present.
Michael Herndon, Margaret Cabot,
I'm here. Good afternoon, everyone.
thank you. Amelia Carricker.
Here.
Helen Lamont,
Hi, everyone.
Tamara Mays, Benjamin Olivari, John Omura,
Present.
Rosemary Payne, Tammy Proctor, Carmen Sanchez, Lisa Schifferly,
Here.
Joan Weiss,
Hi, everyone. Here.
Beverly Yang, and Melissa Gerald, Jan Newsom, and Natalia Sergi will not be able to join us today. Is there anyone that I missed calling their name?
Yes, this is Gisela Dolan.
Hi, Gisela. Okay.
Hi. Thank you.
And this is Emma Nye with ASPE.
And I see Tony Cleckley messaged and she is back.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Greg, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Cheryl. Before we get into the business today, I just wanted to run through our agenda for the folks who are members of the public who are watching, but also to remind council members of the incredible amount of information we have to get through today. We are excited that in just a few minutes, the acting administrator Barkhoff will be introducing the Honorable Xavier Becerra, Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, who will be delivering some remarks on this occasion. And then we're going to hear from a panel of the council co-chairs and Allison Barkhoff, who are going to present an overview of the national strategy to support family caregivers that was just released today. We are also going to have an opportunity to hear from our incredible collaborating partners at the John A. Hartford Foundation, the National Academy for State Health Policy, and Generations United about the technical assistance activities that are currently underway to support the implementation of the national strategy. These technical assistance activities are going to be so key and so integral to our the ability of us to implement all of the actions that are in the strategy. And so we're really excited to be able to present not only to the council members, but also to the public that's joining some of the great tools and resources that are available. We also have a representative from the White House Domestic Policy Council who will be joining us later. And then we've also set aside a little bit of time because we want to hear from the council members about their experience and hopefully get some of your thoughts as to where the future of this work should go. Before I turn it over to Allison, I want to just do a couple of brief housekeeping announcements. To the council members, as you're tuned in, be sure that your mics are on mute and your video is turned off when you're not speaking. And then in that same vein, please remember to unmute your mic and turn on your video when you are speaking. Near the end of the meeting, council members, at about 4 o'clock, if all of you could turn on your camera so that we can express our gratitude to the incredible work that you all have contributed to over the past several years. And this is to everyone who's watching, both council members as well as members of the public. We have sign language interpretation on screen the entire time. However, if you prefer to use the closed caption feature, that is also available, and you can turn that on by clicking the CC icon at the bottom of your screen. And then finally, to the members of the public who are tuned in, I just want to point out a little bit of a difference between this meeting and previous full council meetings. We have turned off the chat feature for this particular meeting, because beginning on October 1st, we will be opening up a 60-day period of public comment on the strategy itself. And we are encouraging every member of the public who has an interest in the strategy and its contents to submit comments regarding the strategy. We are going to be notifying through the ACL updates on October 1st when that public comment period goes live on that day. So if you haven't signed up for ACL updates, please be sure to do so. We want to use that opportunity to hear feedback as well as directions to go for the next iteration of the national strategy, which we're going to be hearing a lot more about shortly. So with that, that's the housekeeping that I have, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our acting administrator and acting assistant secretary for aging, Allison Barkoff. Allison, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg, and good afternoon to all of the council members and to everyone listening in from the public. I'm so thrilled to be here today. As Greg said, my name is Allison Barkoff, and I am ACL's acting administrator and assistant secretary for aging. And I really just want to start off by welcoming everyone and thanking you for being here this afternoon. And again, particularly thanking the members of the RAISE and Grandparent Advisory Councils. I am so honored and I'm so excited that we are here gathering for the release of the first ever national strategy to support family caregivers. The RAISE and SGRG councils, with the support from our very committed partners in the private sector and across the federal government, and with important input from people all across the country, have spent the last 3 years working towards this day. Last fall, I had really the privilege of joining the two councils as we delivered initial reports to Congress, which included an inventory of existing federal programs to support family caregivers, as well as recommendations around strategies. And both reports really focused on recommendations for change that were the result of in-depth analysis and review by a whole range. We actually got thousands of comments of engaged stakeholders and partners. In the last year, y'all have been very, very busy. And now, a year later, you have created something that is so powerful, truly a first of its kind document, and one that so many stakeholders have called for so long. And that's a vision about how we can together move our country forward in support of family caregivers. This strategy was literally just delivered to Congress before the meeting started, and it's being published on acl.gov right now. This is truly, truly a huge accomplishment and a really important milestone. And I can't emphasize that it is coming at such a critical moment in time. As I said the last time that I met with you, frankly, I think every time that I've had a chance to meet with the two councils, COVID has shown such a spotlight on the critical role that family caregivers play. We know, and the reports have laid out, family caregivers have long been the backbone of our long-term care system. That throughout the pandemic, so many family caregivers have had to take on even more to help the people with disabilities and older adults and children that they provide support to stay safe in their own homes and in their own communities. More and more grandparents and other relatives have taken on family caregiving roles, caring for the many children who lost parents during the pandemic. And the pandemic has made this caregiving crisis visible, really for the first time, to policymakers and to the public, and has created truly, at least in my 30 years doing this work, this unprecedented momentum to take action to better support family caregivers and our entire caregiving infrastructure. So now it's up to us. We really need to seize the momentum. We need to seize this moment, and we really need to work together to leverage the national strategy to help drive needed changes. As you all know, supporting family caregivers is a critical part of the Biden-Harris administration's work to strengthen the caregiving infrastructure. This is a critical pillar. We have family caregivers, we have the direct care workforce, we have the work that we need to do around family leave and around childcare. It's a whole breadth of things, but this is a critical piece. And for those of you who have looked at the agenda, the fact that we have the White House and the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services joining us for this meeting, I think really speaks volumes about the administration's and HHS's commitment to this issue. I just want to share a little bit of an anecdote. One piece of evidence of really just how front burner this is, how this has become, dinner table conversation, is the fact that literally every day I see a story in a newspaper or hear on the radio or see on social media about caregiving. And last week, just actually a few days ago, I heard a radio interview on NPR with Mindy Freed, who hosts a podcast called The Shape of Care that shares the perspectives of family caregivers, direct care workers, and people who receive care. And while the whole interview was really outstanding, I just want to share with each of you something that Mindy said that really resonated with me. She said that caregiving is about relationships. Of course, it's about the relationship between the person who is providing care for someone and the person who's receiving that care. And of course, that story, that relationship is of course at the center of what we're doing. But it's also about the relationship of care workers and the system in which they work, whether that's part of an employee of an agency or an independent provider, or family caregivers who are working within this really complex family caregiving system. And then there's also the relationship between the whole caregiving landscape and the context of so many policy issues. And I really thought that captured it. And what struck me as I heard it, and I was thinking about the national strategy, I was thinking about my comments to you, is for the first time, the national strategy really brings all of those pieces together. It is so important, the stories that we tell of what it looks like for family caregivers and what it means for people with disabilities, for older adults, for children who are part of kinship and grand families, and the videos that this council created as part of our last report were just so incredibly powerful. A theme we're going to hear about today is really this connection between family caregivers and the direct care workforce. It's a key priority. It's one of those cross-cutting pieces, and we have to think about the intersection of those two. And then finally, this report just lays out the whole range of issues that members of our Congress and legislation really need to consider, in some of those barriers, some of the policy barriers that exist in some of our federal programs, in state policies, and again, strategies to move that forward. So that's really why I think this release is just so important right now. Delivering this to Congress at just such a pivotal time and sharing this with really the entire country is so significant and so important. We're going to be hearing in a little bit, and Christine, let me know when we have the secretary. Okay, not quite yet. We're going to be hearing from the secretary, and I think so many of us approach this from so many different angles. I feel incredibly privileged with our secretary that he comes at this from the personal perspective of having been a family caregiver, and I really bring that myself to this work, being a family member and really thinking about how everything that I do as a sibling is really focused on the ultimate goal, the mission of ACL, which is about helping people with disabilities and older adults really live full lives in the community. We're really lucky as I look across the screen here and as we look at the members of the council that so many of you bring your own experience as a caregiver, and there is nothing like that lived experience. Also centered in this work is the people who are receiving the support, people with disabilities and older adults, and to have that lived perspective also on the council has been so important. But we're also bringing together, the expertise across 15 federal agencies. And as someone who has spent time in federal government, really finding ways for us to collaborate, to find those synergies is not easy. And I really want to thank the many federal agencies who have been part of this and the RAISE and SGRG councils for bringing us together to really identify how can we leverage every tool in our toolbox. And it's critical that we use our federal programs to move forward on some of these really, really critical goals. I also want to take the opportunity to thank our team. I should have probably done that at the top. Greg and his entire team. I will do the formal thank yous at the end, but this has been, such a huge amount of work to be able to bring this together at this really important time. I know we are kind of reaching the end of this iteration of the RAISE and SGRG councils, and we wanted to make sure we were able to get this report out that reflects this council's energy, that reflects this council's work, and really to bring it to this Congress that has really been struggling with and thinking about so many strategies to advance issues around caregiving. While we are waiting for the secretary, and I think he should be joining any moment, Greg, I want to just turn it to you to make sure for anyone who joined late that everybody has the accessibility instructions. If you could do that just one more time in case anybody joined late. So I'm going to kick it over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Allison, and thank you for those wonderful framing remarks for our afternoon here. Yes, so if to everyone who's watching, both on the council as well as in the public, the ASL interpreters will be on screen the entire time. However, if you prefer to use closed captioning, then you can click on the little CC icon at the bottom of your screen. And then that will get you the closed captioning that we have running as well. And then to the members of the council as well, please keep your mics muted and your videos off when you're not speaking, and we will prompt you later on in the meeting at around 4 o'clock to turn on your cameras again as well. We have a little activity that we would like to go through with everyone towards the end of the meeting, but we're trying to make this as accessible and open as we possibly can. And as I had said earlier also at the start, we have disabled the chat feature for the purposes of this meeting. We are encouraging everyone who wishes to make a comment or to provide comment on the national strategy to do so after October 1st. On October 1st, we will be sending out an ACL updates advising the world that the strategy is open for public comment, and folks will be able to submit them online on a special web page that we have devised that will help to capture that information. And then all of that information, Allison's going to talk a little bit about this a little bit more later. That information that we gather is going to be used to inform future iterations of this strategy, as well as updates to those reports to Congress, because both statutes, the RAISE Act and the Grandparent Act, require that the reports be kept relevant and current, and updates be submitted to Congress on a regular basis. And one of the hallmarks of this effort, as you'll hear about in a bit, has been our engagement with the public to make sure that we are grounding everything we do in what matters most to the people who need the supports and the people that they support.
And Greg, I'll just add for people, we'll make sure to put it in the chat. We will, as Greg said, be sending out information. So our announcement with the links to the full report should be going out quite soon, as well as the announcements through ACL's listserv when this is open to the public. So Christine, can we not put in the chat? Okay, if you go to acl.gov, so I guess I'm going to have to do this verbally. If you are not already signed up for ACL's listserv, that really is the best way to get real-time information, including about the ongoing work that we'll be doing for the national strategy. So if you go to acl.gov and you sign up for updates, please sign up there. And again, this will be sent out to everyone. We also have a RAISE webpage on our website, as well as SGRG, and we will put it there. I will just add a little bit to what Greg said, that this is a start. We are starting with this national family caregiver strategy, but as we did with the initial report, we know this is a living document and one that we will be updating. Okay, I think I see the star of our next piece. So do we have you, Secretary Becerra? I think you can turn on your camera if you are on. Awesome, great. While the secretary is doing that, I am so pleased and privileged to introduce Secretary Javier Becerra, the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. We are so happy to have him with us again. We've had a chance to have him twice. After he joined us in January, when we first brought together the RAISE and SGRG councils to develop the national strategy. And he gave us a really strong directive. He told us to think big, to think bold, and he has been asking for updates over the last year. And he has been very eager to see the finished product. And I am really so proud of what we are able to share with the Secretary and with Congress today. Secretary Becerra began his legal career in Massachusetts, fighting for the rights of people with disabilities. And in Congress, he continued that fight, fighting to expand access to healthcare and to strengthen programs like Medicare and Medicaid that are critical to older adults and disabled people. And he brought that same focus on disability and aging to his work as Attorney General in California, including by starting a Bureau of Disability Rights in the AG's office. He is a strong and impassioned advocate for policies that support family caregivers, drawing from his own personal experience caring for his aging parents. He is a true believer in an America that is a better and stronger country when everyone is valued, everyone is included, and everyone can participate. He is truly a champion for building and strengthening the infrastructure that will make that a reality. And he has truly been the wind behind our back as we've moved forward on developing this strategy. So it is such an honor to be able to introduce him today. And with pleasure, I yield the floor to Secretary Becerra.
Allison, Assistant Secretary Barkoff, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm honored to speak with you, be with you again, historic event. This rollout, the first ever national strategy to support family caregivers. I really need to thank a whole lot of folks, right, for making this possible. We need to celebrate all that hard work. We have to celebrate that you did such a phenomenal job, and we have to celebrate that we now have a roadmap on how to move forward. So to each and every one of the council members, thank you for your steadfast effort over the past, 3+ years, particularly during a pandemic, to get this done. Supporting caregivers, family caregivers has been just an urgent public health care issue, and COVID made that very clear. We need to address this, and we need to intensify our effort. And with this roadmap in place, boy, can we launch. So I have to say, from when I joined you in January to where we are today, you have ramped up. You have made it possible for family caregivers to believe that they will be heard. And today I'm thrilled to be able to say that we have taken the steps that are necessary to ensure that we will provide the support to our families as they are needed. I must tell you, I think what you've put together in these reports, it is not only comprehensive, it's not just inclusive, it is spot on. And so thank you for that tremendous work that you have done. It is amazing when you think about it. 9 months after that initial meeting, you brought us to a major milestone on this path to achieving the vision with the publication of this national strategy to support family caregivers. That vision of really being there for everyone is so crucial. And I can tell you that I saw it, I never thought of it this way because it just sort of seemed kind of natural within my family. My grandparents, both my grandparents and my wife's grandparents, they all spent their last years of life living with one of their children. And it was just commonplace for me as a kid to see that happening with my grandparents. But when I had a chance to do that with my father, to be with him his last several years that he lived in my home and died in my home, I can tell you that some of my proudest moments are the quiet moments that you don't really talk about. When my father would say, he would constantly apologize. I'm sorry, perdóname, mijo. He would say, forgive me, my son, that I'm making you do things that are only a person should do for themselves. These very personal things. And those are the things that make you proudest, right? Because those aren't the things you talk about, but they're the things that make you believe that you're giving back to those who've been so good to you. And so I think it is important for us to acknowledge that there are people who, unlike me, had a better circumstance to do this in, where I had now become financially secure, unlike my parents. We have to do what we can to make sure no one is constrained from providing the care to someone they love. And quite honestly, no one can do it better than someone who loves you. And so for us to make it possible for someone who needs care to get it from someone who's not just getting paid, but who loves you. And for those who love you to know that they can do it and not take on these extensive and heavy burdens by trying to do that. We're just making America a better place. And so I can't say enough about where I think we're going to take this. And so I thank you for that very, very much. I looked through the reports. There's nothing there that I wouldn't want to have said. You just said it better than I probably could have ever said it. And there's nothing missing that I think we need to say. Now the challenge is on us to find the resources and get everybody on board to make this happen. And so I hope that as you move forward and these councils don't feel like the task is done, that what we do is we really set us on a course. Because I will tell you from my own personal knowledge and experience, we've got someone at the top in President Joe Biden who wants to see this happen. He is becoming a game changer president. And I think in regards to family caregiving, I think he wants to be able to carry that title as well. And so let's take full advantage. Let us push the envelope. As I always say, let's not do mild. This is not a time for us to be afraid or to be modest. Let us not be mild. Let us get out there and get this done. You've pulled together everything that we need to know. You're doing what's right. And there are millions of families who are just waiting for your strategy to be implemented. So on behalf of HHS, and I especially want to thank the team led by Allison for everything we have done at HHS and we will continue to do, but to everyone who participated here, thank you so very much. Let's not do mild. let's knock this one out of the park, because it's not just hitting a home run. It's ultimately, as my dad probably tells me from the heavens up there, it's taking care of those we love. So thank you all very much for letting me be part of this. I will, even though I only came to the first and now this latest, I'm going to incorporate myself and take full credit for having been part of this from the very beginning, because I want in. And let's get this done. So thank you all very much, Allison. I turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much, Secretary, for those words. I think throughout the day, we're going to keep reminding all the council members, we don't do mild. This is our moment in time, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. So thank you so much, Secretary, for those comments. Now, I just want to add before we jump to the next thing on the agenda, we just have this incredible opportunity, and I think the report you've put together creates something for everyone to do. You know, we will be talking about, and of course the Secretary is referring to work that Congress can do, work that we as federal agencies can do, but you all did such an incredible job making clear there's work for states to do. There's work for local communities to do. There's work for foundations. There's work for the private sector. There's work for employers. There's work for advocates. So I think really our goal today is to lay out for the public, for each of us, the map that is there, but to really identify how are we going to take this from where we should go to the action that needs to happen. I could not think of a more important time. And again, the winds behind our back, the public visibility, the knowledge that policymakers have about these key issues. I just really want to encourage all of us as we move forward to think about how we can translate this incredibly rich document. That's a start. It's the beginning to move forward. So thank you so much again, Secretary, for joining us. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Sarah Markell to walk us through and turn it over to members of the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon, members of the SGRG and RAISE advisory councils. It is a huge honor to be here with you today. This strategy that you are releasing was written by not one, but 2 advisory committees. That's a lot of authors. And it's a testament to your commitment to transparency and inclusion that you would invite your technical writer to be part of this presentation. So thank you for having me. As many of you know, writing by committee is never an elegant process. It's often messy and laborious, but you made it work. You shared stories and perspectives freely with one another and ACL, verbally and in writing. When you came across helpful materials in the course of your work and your daily lives, you sent articles and research data to our resource inboxes. You suggested ideas and provided respectful feedback to each other and ACL. Many of you participated in document reviews, refining, removing, and changing text to add subtle nuance so that the strategy reflects the broad spectrum of caregiver stakeholder perspectives. And if the timestamps on those documents are anything to go by, some of you put many late night hours into those efforts. And it has paid off. You did it. In less than a year after the release of your respective reports to Congress, you have a first of its kind national strategy that can now be revised and shaped based on future input and public comments. So with no further ado, allow me to introduce the 5 council co-chairs who will present to you the 2022 National Strategy to Support Family Caregivers. First, Dr. Casey Shillum, who is a RAISE Council co-chair, will provide background and information on why this strategy was so important. Then, Jaya Lent, who is an SGRG Council co-chair, will talk about the strategy as a vehicle for action and advocacy. Following that, Dr. Ethelyn McQueen Gibson, SGRG Council Co-Chair, will describe the unique needs and circumstances of kinship families and grandfamilies. Nancy Murray will then discuss 4 cross-cutting considerations that must be embedded in any supports for family caregivers. And finally, Dr. Alan Stevens, RAISE Council Co-Chair, will describe how states and communities and other entities can support the strategy. And after Dr. Stevens, we will hear again from our own Acting Administrator, Allison Barkoff. She will describe the federal actions that are in the strategy. And with that, I turn it over to you, Dr. Shillum.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It has been a joy to work on this process with everyone throughout the entire time that we've been together. And I want to just say welcome to everyone joining us. I'm Casey Shillum, Dean and Professor of the University of Portland School of Nursing and Health Innovations in Portland, Oregon, co-chair of the RAISE Family Caregiving Advisory Council, and a family caregiver. So after these 3 very long years, we are honored to share with you today the first National Family Caregiving Strategy. So thank you so much. I'm not sure, I'll just ask for the next slide as we move along here. Thank you. Many people will be a family caregiver. And so when we recognize the importance of this, the reports we've developed and now this strategy, we know that people will be not only be family caregivers, but they will also need family caregiving in their lifetime. Each year, millions of people provide a broad range of assistance for health, for quality of life, or for helping with maintaining the independence of somebody who is close to them. There's an estimated 1 in 6 individuals who are family caregivers, and more than 2/3 of the people will need assistance with tasks as they age. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, as we've already heard, the critical shortage of direct care workers that has been exacerbated by this pandemic, we now have a heightened reliance on family caregivers. Caregiving looks like on the next kinship caregiving. And the predominance of family caregivers are female spouses and partners, parents or siblings, grandparents, children or youth. And so when we look at these memberships of family and kinship caregivers, oftentimes people expect that they're doing these services or providing this care as a member of a family, that it's an expected service that's provided in a membership of a family and not something that is done above and beyond as a recognized family caregiver. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that there are a lot of different types of a blend of context and experiences that impact family caregiving. So you can see that these different types of context and experiences listed here are just a sampling of the range of the possibilities that make every caregiving situation very unique. So for example, there are costs and complexities that differ in every family caregiving situation. And the context of family caregiving, as we understand it, is further complicated by considerable inequities with respect to how they are identified, recognized, and supported in their caregiving work. And complicating all of these factors even further is the lack of comprehensive data reflective of all demographics of all family caregivers. So in the next slide, we're going to look at how the advisory councils defined family caregivers. And in those first few months of our work, we really looked at the broadest possible view that we could come up with in defining family caregiving. We recognized that people of all ages, from youth to grandparents, people with or without disabilities, are providing care to family members, whether they are chosen family or family members who are related to one another. They're providing care for people in their communities or at a distance. And they're providing care for a variety of needs and across the lifespan and across the care continuum. So on the next slide, we're going to show you some of the assumptions that we made in our work together. And these are the 5 truths or those assumptions that we recognize that if we were going to be successful in finding strategies for fully recognizing and supporting family caregivers, we needed to operate from these assumptions. So these include that family caregiving is a public health issue. And this has been supported by the CDC declaring that family caregiving is a public health issue and that caregivers deserve recognition. Family caregiving is complex and caregivers need assistance. Including family caregivers adds value to systems, processes, and teams of care. Having those family caregivers be a member of the caregiving team with health providers, with social supports and social networks really does help to increase the quality of life and the value of family caregiving. And supporting family caregivers is a crucial component of reducing care costs. And finally, meaningful change requires intentionally engaging family caregivers in the systems of change. There are no others who understand the impacts of family caregiving other than those who are providing the care themselves. So if we move on to the next slide, we're going to share with you as we move through our time together here with you today, exploring some of the strategy narratives that provide an abbreviated background on the breadth of family caregiving. This strategy also helps to provide some context to the issues that are addressed throughout 4 components of the strategy. And you're going to hear about these components from the other panel speakers from the other speakers on our panel for today. And finally, I'm going to share that in our last slide that the Council's vision for the strategy and for family caregivers really did start at the first of our meetings when we were brought together in 2019 and in early 2020. We developed this 2022 national strategy to support family caregivers from the perspective of a whole of society approach that assists family caregivers from beginning to end of their experience, regardless of what that journey looks like. So the first meetings that we held in 2019 and 2020, we spent a considerable amount of time creating a vision for our work and what we hoped to accomplish. And we believe that that vision has been carried out through the work we've done, to the first report that we set out with the recommendations, to the strategy that we now present to you today. Of critical importance is the fact that the strategy that we've released is only the beginning of this work. It is the first of what will be many future iterations and is a historic first step that sets the foundation for so much of what we can do as a nation to support our family caregivers. So now I am happy to introduce our next speaker, Jaya Lent.
Thank you, Dr. Shillem, and thank you to Secretary Becerra and Acting Assistant Secretary Barkoff, and to the Council, the co-chairs, for the incredible work on this document. It's been an honor to be a part of this work, and special thanks to those that brought lived experience as caregivers themselves. The wisdom and contributions have been incredibly critical to this work. I am Jaya Lent. I am Deputy Executive Director at Generations United, which is home to the National Center on Grand Families, which is a term we use interchangeably with grandparents raising grandchildren and kinship care. I am charged with describing how this strategy can be used as a vehicle for action and advocacy and why that is important. And in my role at Generations United, we have done advocacy around caregiving over the last work. It's become really critically clear that having a roadmap and a collective action agenda is central to having effective change. Advocacy drives change. Change is what we have identified is needed to improve supports and services and policies to help caregiving families. So that is what this document does. It is a document that provides a roadmap for change to really get the policy ball rolling in support of families and caregivers. And we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So as we present this roadmap, we are really want to provide a context for it. So this is not a strategy that occurred out of the blue or overnight. It is really the latest endeavor to support family caregivers, and it has its roots in action at the federal level that has gone back 20 plus years. So you'll see here on your screen a list of just a snapshot of some major federal legislative changes that have happened over the last 20 years. And we start with the really foundational investment in the National Family Caregiver Support Program and Native American Caregiver Support Program in 2000. Really the first time when we saw a major investment of family caregiving, supporting those family caregivers at home so that families get the support they need to provide for their loved ones without having to wait for them to go into institutional care or facility care. And when that program became a reality, it also specifically recognized that grandparents and other relatives were raising children and needed to be a part of that investment and the opportunity. But as that program became a federal reality, we want to recognize that even before that happened, investments in family caregiving were happening at the state and local levels. We saw a number of family caregiver programs, for example, in states like Pennsylvania, Oregon, and Washington, that in many ways very closely mirrored what we see with the National Family Caregiver Support Program today. So before this, we had action, and we continue to see action over the next 20 years. Just a snapshot here, the VA Caregiver Support Program, Lifespan Respite, looking at how we can provide short breaks to families across the lifespan. The RAISE and the SGRG Act created the councils that are responsible for putting this strategy together. And then the Family First Prevention Services Act was one in a series of child welfare investments to really seek ways to better begin to support kinship families and grandfamilies. And then most recently, the investment in the National Technical Assistance Center on Kinship and Grandfamilies that was included as part of the American Rescue Plan Act, which you will hear about further in this program. Next slide, please. So as we were creating the strategy, we really recognized that the strategy has multiple purposes, and each will really help us ensure greater recognition and support of family and kinship caregivers. So a couple of the purposes that we wanted to elevate in particular is it really is a goal to build better alignment across sector responses. It is really easy to end up doing work in silos, and this is an opportunity for us to bring the good work of different sectors together, for us to learn from each other, to coordinate, to make sure that supports are seamless. But that only happens with talking and building together a united strategy. So this strategy will help us facilitate collaboration to seal up those gaps that we may see in services. And we also really see it as an opportunity to provide the recognition and support that family caregivers need. And part of doing that is making sure that we advance equity. What kind of supports and services family caregivers have across the country varies. So what we do to provide the support they need is going to vary as well. There may be certain parts of the country that need a greater investment to get up to where we see supports and services in other parts of the country. Investments and the approach to providing support need to be tailored to the unique needs of different parts of the country. So we really need to be looking at this work with an equity lens. And of course, it all needs to be centered in a recognition of the impact of trauma and using trauma-informed approaches. We'll move to the next slide, please. So this document is really intended to have many audiences and many users, and you will see that it's laid out with some clear communications about the different audiences that each section is directed towards. We've listed just a few of them here, everywhere from states, tribes, and communities to community-based programs, child welfare, aging support services systems, healthcare, business, faith-based, funders and philanthropy, colleges, universities, academic research institutions, and of course, most importantly, advocates, family caregivers, and those that have the lived experience as a caregiver. And next slide. The council really recognized, as was elevated earlier in the program, that this is a critical time in which the strategy is being released. The Biden and Harris administration is keenly focused on strengthening and supporting the care economy. And this strategy is really part of that focus. And so the council sees the strategy really as a driver for legislative and policy changes. It can be a tool for members of Congress as they consider and craft legislation to support families and caregivers of all backgrounds. In fact, the main narrative of the strategy provides an extensive list of areas where we need legislative and policy change if we're going to meaningfully move the needle forward in a positive direction to support and recognize families. So on the slide here, you see just a couple of recommendations that are called for in terms of key themes. We see themes around caregiver support planning and infrastructure development, around funding streams, funding levels, and new investments, more universal adoption of caregiver assessments where appropriate, and the need for expansion of long-term support service options that include family caregivers. And of course, there are workforce issues, so ways that we can strengthen the direct care workforce. And then addressing issues impacting family caregivers, like expanding the availability of services in key benefit programs, recognizing employment and employer concerns, and then very significantly, the impact on finances of families and what we can do to reduce and address the financial needs that come with caregiving. So before I wrap and turn it over to our next presenter, we want to spend a little bit of time talking about what the strategy is and what the strategy is not. So the strategy really is designed as a vision and a roadmap for meaningful change. What it is not is a timeline or a how-to document. That will be the work of the group and the communities moving forward. Communication and collaboration to make this document work and be meaningful is key. It provides a baseline for action and progress, but it's not requirements or musts. Again, that will be the work of the collaborative. It offers strategies for many stakeholder groups, but we recognize that this is not an exhaustive list, and it's not the final list. As many have said, it's a living document. But most significantly, it is the first national strategy to support family caregivers, and it is not the last. And we look forward to working with you on it. Now I'm going to turn the program over to Dr. Gibson to dig in a bit deeper on issues affecting kinship families and grandfamilies. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Dr. Ethelyn McQueen Gibson, and I would like to first of all thank you for allowing me to serve as co-chair for the Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Council for the past 2 years. I bring you greetings from the campus of Hampton University School of Nursing, and I am in a very unique position because not only am I a registered nurse and a professor, but I am also in a unique position that I have been raised by my grandmother. And so from that position, it allowed me to be able to truly see through the prism of why this council was very, very important. And so I am charged in my few slides to help you see why it was important for these two councils to come together and put our two prisms together. As the Raise and Grandparents Council worked together on our reports, we saw how evident it was that our similarities and significant differences, they were very important. And so we could address them together in our strategies. For this reason, we felt that it was ideal for our councils to work together and create a single comprehensive national strategy that would focus on the breadth of family caregiving challenges and opportunities. Next slide. You will see here on this slide some very astounding statistics. This information on this slide only tells part of the strategy. But I want you to actually look at a couple of things of note here. And I want you to just think about why it's important to not lose a point of why family caregivers of grandchildren are important. Because number one, a lot of people think that, what about the stigma of kinship and grandparent caregivers? There is no stigma. Grandparent and kinship caregivers are often judged unjustly because people don't understand why they are caring for their grandchildren. Many times people are asking, why are they taking on that job? But it is actually a very, very special job. Number two, the services, as we were going through many of the reports and as people were talking to us as a group, we found that the child welfare system was very fragmented and it was very difficult to navigate and to access. Number three, schools we found were not recognizing the case that parents were not there and that families had very unique needs. Number four, many of these parents were going, or grandparents were going through some sort of significant trauma. And that was something that needed to be addressed. And then lastly, if you look here, in keeping these children with grandparent caregivers, it was very important that we needed to be able to address the needs through the social service system that were not going to be addressed if they were not allowed to be with their grandparent caregivers. The next slide. So we were hoping that addressing the unique needs and considerations of grandparent caregivers would allow us to address these unique needs and considerations. The councils recognized the opportunity to highlight similarities, but more important, to call out differences that make kinship and grandparent caregiving households very unique. The fact that we have limited and inconsistent data on kinship caregivers, non-grandparent caregivers. This can result in inconsistent treatment on kin and grandparent caregivers, depending on the inside or the outside child welfare systems. While caregiving is costly, and I want to repeat that, costly across the board, we do know that kin and grandparent caregivers is severely lacking. It's severely lacking. And you can see that here. The strategy that you will see in the report that was delivered today speaks to those unique needs and considerations and will offer ideas on how we can talk about some of those siloed services and how they can be realigned so that we can meet the needs of these truly exceptional families. And then lastly, the last bullet, we will be addressing adverse childhood experiences. Let's go to the next slide. The federal actions within the strategy has now allowed us to look at the SGRG Advisory Council. Number 2, which is near and dear to my heart, being a nurse, we will definitely be looking at the electronic medical record. Readers will also find that we will be looking at outcomes and actions at a very global nature, because that's going to be very, very important. And then also, what's also very, very important is that we will be looking at all federal agencies, at the state and the community sectors, and addressing challenges to kin and grandparent-led families, and looking at all of the issues that they face. We will be looking at AmeriCorps. We will be looking at SAMHSA. And then definitely we know that we must look at all things, especially across kinship and grandparent caregivers in Indian country. And then shortly, we also talked about how we will be coming back and Allison Barkoff will be addressing even more of those issues when she comes back to talk to us. The next slide. Also, outreach and engagement within our communities. I'm a community health nurse, and I spend a lot of time with nursing students and with families. We must engage at the community level. It's great when we see families in hospitals and in the emergency room, but we really, really must meet families at the community level. That is so important, because caregiving starts in the community. Many are broadly applicable. Many of these actions here for the state, increasing partnerships. Those partnerships, I know as we've talked about those partnerships in the African American community, those partnerships we're working along with the NAACP, with the Urban League, training programs with kinship groups, with grandparent caregivers. So making them more applicable. We talked about faith communities. When we're talking about mental health and trauma and substance abuse disorders, all of those, we must partner with our community groups to make the difference when we're talking about kinship and grandparent groups. So those are just some highlights that we will be weaving into our strategies. But again, as we talk about the strategies, they must touch grandparents and families again, and we must make them specific to families where we need them to be. So with that, I'm now going to turn it back over to my next speaker, Nancy Murray. And again, thank you for that opportunity to serve. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Murray. I'm the Senior Vice President of Achieva, an organization here in Western Pennsylvania that provides services for children and adults with disabilities and their families. More importantly, my husband and I have 3 adult children, all of whom have Down syndrome. And let me begin by saying that serving as a co-chair of the RAISE Council has been one of honor for me as a family caregiver. You know, in the beginning, we looked at family caregiving from multiple perspectives. If we could look at the next slide, please. We spent a lot of time thinking about actual caregivers and the different ages, genders, sexual orientations, as you can see there on the slide, how their cultural backgrounds played a part. Their race, their ethnicity, religious affiliation, socioeconomic status. We looked at caregiving from all of those different vantage points as they impact the carers. Then we also moved on to thinking about the persons that that receive care, and the relationships between people giving and receiving care, how different caregiving relationships are formed depending on the diseases, the disabilities that people might have, their cognitive status, certainly their abilities and their strengths, and how their healthcare needs play a part in the caregiving relationship. We also looked at the characteristics of caregiving, how the length of caregiving impacts a relationship, the experience, the skills that the caregiver brings to the relationship, how the caregiving, or rather the advocacy skills, the communication skills of the caregiver really impact the relationship. Certainly the strength of the caregiver's network, both family-wise, but also community-wise. And we also looked at all the other obligations that caregivers have. And then we looked at the wider context that caregiving takes place in. We looked at how the living situations of the caregiver and the care receiver. We looked at the financial resources of everybody in the family, the community resources. And that's what I said, this is a very multi-layered look at family caregiving. And that's how we started our work. Next slide, please. And then we decided upon these 4 cross-cutting considerations. We firmly believe that we needed to place the person and the family at the center of all interactions and all of our policy decisions. We needed to address trauma and its impact on families. We also needed to put forth and advance the idea of equity for families in underserved communities across the United States. And last but certainly not least, we needed to elevate direct care workers, direct support professionals as partners in family caregiving, because frankly, family caregivers cannot do it alone. We need the direct care workers and direct support professionals in our lives. So let's take a look at each of these individually. Person-centered approaches, person-centered family care is really the hallmark of our work. This means that people are treated as individuals, and we need to allow time to find out what is important, both to the individual person and the family. And that's frankly where the terms person and family-centered care come from. We also spent time discussing how caregivers are often overlooked in clinical and social service settings, often not made to feel a part of decision-making, and that needed to change if certainly the person and the family are at the center. Certainly then the caregivers cannot be overlooked. Person-centered approaches also support families and family caregivers and helps to create plans of care that balance the needs of both the preferences and the needs of both the caregiver and the care recipient. And last but certainly not least, person and family directed support programs should be strength-based, definitely culturally informed. They need to establish connections to both professional and unpaid or informal supports. Certainly prioritizing the rights, the choices, the ability to control situations for both the care receiver, the caregiver. Person-centered supports always drive partnerships, teamwork, communication, facilitation. Those are all at the foundation, if you will, of person and family-centered care. And then, of course, it wouldn't be complete without making sure that things are documented, that plans are implemented, and that person family-centered support plans are monitored updated as needed, always to make sure that what is in place continues to make sense for the person and the family. Next slide, please. You know, unfortunately, we also had to take into account trauma. And probably everybody on this call knows that trauma is an event or a circumstance that results in physical, emotional, or life-threatening harm. And, you know, little did we know at the beginning of our work that the world would soon experience an historic pandemic that in and of itself also was a source of trauma. As I think back to, you know, what families experienced, mine included, certain trauma included the social isolation that we experienced, the hospital visiting restrictions that we experienced, all of a sudden children's worlds being upturned, not being able to go to school, parents working at home. And for many family caregivers, all of a sudden we didn't have others coming into our home. So all of a sudden our caregiving took on a 24/7 time clock. But if we just go back and think about trauma even before COVID, trauma has a lasting effect on people. And of course, each person's experience to trauma is different, but we know that trauma will impact the mental health, the physical health, emotional health of individuals, our social well-being, and our spiritual well-being. And it's hard to imagine sometimes, but it's estimated that 90% of Americans are exposed to a traumatic event or more than one traumatic event in their lifetimes. And we certainly have come to understand that trauma changes how people respond to situations and circumstances. And certainly children and kinship families and grand families certainly experience how trauma has changed their lives. Families who are dealing with an elderly caregiver or care member who's now experiencing dementia or Alzheimer's, that's another different situation or circumstance that people respond to after such a traumatic event. And certainly we know that support for family givers must include strategies that create safe environments where the effects of trauma are always recognized and understood. Next slide, please. We also looked at many, many different underserved communities and the need to establish more equity and support for family caregivers in these underserved communities. We looked at American Indian, Alaska Natives, Native caregivers, and we learned that many may not seek assistance when they need it. We looked at Asian American and Pacific Islander caregivers. We learned that actually in this group, there are 50 unique ethnicities, 100 different languages, and many of which have different perspectives on caregiving. We looked at Black and African American caregivers, and the more intensive care, more intensive support that they often need. For me, I had never really thought about caregiving youth and how caregiving youth often have to miss school. Also, do you have to deal with, you know, the loss of social and developmental opportunities, and the realization that there are few resources that acknowledge them or support them. We looked at the Hispanic and Latino caregivers and learned that more than likely, they are going to be the sole caregivers of their loved ones. As mentioned before, we certainly spent a lot of time, you know, thinking about kin and grandparent caregivers who open their homes many times unexpectedly to their grandchildren who can no longer stay with their parents. And then we looked at the LGBTQIA caregivers who may become caregivers at a younger age, but also the increased risk of long-term financial challenges and burnout, given that they begin their caregiving journey at a younger age. And then last but not least, we realized that one of the hallmarks, next slide please, of this work has got to be strengthening the direct care workforce. This is a national public health emergency. This is something that both federal and every state government needs to begin to address as an emergency. Certainly, we need to see the authorization of more funding to increase rates so that we can recruit and retain experienced and caring direct care professionals. Family caregivers can't do it by themselves forever. We need access to well-educated, well-qualified direct care workforce. And that means better pay. We need to improve their working conditions, their training, and their improved career pathways so that they're not only recruited, but they're retained. We also need to come to the realization that 90% of direct care workers are women. So they are balancing the needs of the people they're providing care to, but also their own families. We learned that 3 in 5 professional caregivers are people of color. 1 in 3 are immigrants to the United States. They also have families of their own that they need to care for. And it's hard to understand this, but at the same time that these folks are working sometimes in a day, 1 or 2 shifts, that more than half of them also rely on some form of public assistance. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to my fellow co-chair, Alan Stevens.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. I'm Alan Stevens. For 30 years, I've conducted research in the field of family caregiving, especially around dementia. And I come from what many call a caregiving family. I observed my mother caring for my aunts and uncles as they aged, saw my mother care for my dad. I saw my sisters and participated with my family and brother in caring for my mother and her as she lived her late life with dementia. And I saw and participated in with my family who surrounded my sister in the last 6 months of her life as she battled pancreatic cancer. All of those are associated with both pain, but great joy and memorable experiences in the life that I have lived. But with my professional background and my personal experience with caregiving, they still didn't prepare me for the events that we have just been through on the council. I've had no greater experience and more fulfilling experience than serving as co-chair with an amazing group of individuals who were both on the council and of course, individuals on staff at ACL and with NASHB and many, many other folks and the colleagues from Grandparents Council. Because it's been such a great experience of sharing our knowledge, of digging for more information, a curiosity that at times drove some of us crazy because we kept getting deeper and deeper, because we kept understanding the caregiving family more and more. So as you've heard in the previous presentations, our work has been very thorough. It has been very methodological, and it has been supported by really some of the smartest people I've ever worked with across the councils and the support staff. So it brings us to this very exciting point And in a few minutes, ACL Acting Administrator and Acting Assistant Secretary of Aging, Allison Barkoff, is going to talk to us about the federal government's commitment to the national strategy to support family caregivers. But first, I have a chance to talk to you about a national strategy that includes, as it should, more than the feds. It includes the states, the state agencies, organizations within the states, not-for-profit organizations, philanthropic organizations, private sector, and even you and I as individuals in caring communities who want to make things better for our family caregivers. Family caregiving is part of our society. As such, we need to respond to it with a societal level response, which means we have to engage all groups, all sectors of our society, all organizations and institutions, both the formal institutions that we know of through government agencies, plus those that maybe are more informal in terms of how we support our neighbors or how we gather in communities of faith. Those are groups and sectors which, if we recognize caregiving as a societal issue, they have a part because we're part of that society. Let me say it more directly. All communities, all state agencies, all community-based organizations have a role to play. So do our communities of faith, our schools, our child welfare systems, employers, healthcare systems, and those who give money and philanthropy to help support the development of our communities and other humanitarian approaches. In Appendix B of the National Strategy is labeled Actions for States, Communities, and Others. And this provides a roadmap for these groups to start enacting strategies that have been identified as part of the study of the two councils. The strategies are organized according to the 5 goals of the national strategy, and they include approximately 150 specific strategies that have come forward from the work of the group. I'll be more specific in those strategies in a second, but I first want to talk about what was the origin of these strategies that make up this section of the report, of the strategy. Next slide. Next slide. Do I need to move it? Sorry.
Actually, that is the last slide.
Go back to the public engagement at every step slide, please, Chantal. There we go.
I'm sorry, I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it earlier. I apologize. If we could go back, so the strategies come from a very important partnership, and the partnership began with a commitment from the John A. Hartford Foundation to commit funding to support not only the work of the council, but also the dissemination of the report. So they worked with NASHB, and as part of NASHB's work, they were able to, and NASHB is the National Academy for State Health Policy, to create an outreach that is, I think, core to the work that we have done. So let me just give you a quick overview here, is that we began this work with the support of NASHB, with the funding from John A. Hartford, with a deep review of the literature of what was known about caregiving. And confirming that work confirmed that there's compelling evidence for the need for family strategy. But what the critical work of NASHB did was to not just take the words from published documents, but they crosswalked that to the community, to the real lives of family caregivers, working with very important partners in the community, the National Alliance for Caregiving, the Leading Age of the UMass of Boston, and Community Catalyst. So under their direction, these very trusted community leaders in the caregiving field were able to bring forward stories of the real life caregivers. And that has been well documented and reported in the first report to Congress, and is now still on their website. So let me also say that process brought about a number of listening sessions and focus groups that brought about the stories that are there. But more importantly, or equally importantly, it brought more information to the council for the council to consider what are the actual stories and how do they match up with what we're seeing in the literature or what has been written about caregiving. That was very influential in building the strategies that are represented, particularly in this section about state and community options, because so much input came from people who were working at the state level. Next slide. So here are a list of the items that are a summary of items that were that you'll find in this section of the report. I want to emphasize that the strategies that are summarized here and presented in greater detail in the report does not constitute a how-to manual. Rather, it provides a series of well-integrated, well-founded in reports from the caregivers and from the literature of actual activities or programs, or in this case, again, strategies that if implemented could start to address the needs that were so well documented in the reports from caregivers, from what we heard again and again of what caregivers needed. And while the information is very complex and comprehensive, it's not a be all and end all. Rather, it's a beginning place. It is a place to start us thinking even deeper about what is possible. Let me also say, as you look at the list here for actions for state and communities, you'll recognize some of these to be high level. You might call them system change initiatives. Or maybe you've heard about these topics talked about at the federal level, but not the state level. And many of them are and will require joint ventures between federal and state agencies. But if you read the report in section appendix B, I think you will see a different layer to these items that are listed here. A layer that gets away from the larger policy or the larger program development and gets down to the community level of what are things that can be done at the local level? What are things that you and I can do to help start the process of making our communities better for family caregivers? So I encourage you to look at these from a higher level of systems change, but also look carefully at the suggestions that have been brought forth that I think would give all of us a path forward in enacting strategies to support family caregivers. And I will end there and thank you very much for this opportunity. And we'll turn it back over to Allison Barkoff. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan. And thank you to all of the co-chairs for those really great presentations and overview. And I truly want to thank each of you for your leadership and for your expertise on the so many issues that are associated with family and kinship caregiving. And you have truly been invaluable to the work of the councils. Before I talk about the commitment of the federal government, I just want to reflect on a few things from the presentation. I think it was really powerful. I've had the chance to read the report actually several times. And I just want to highlight, I think, a few pieces from the presentations and in the report. I think one thing that is so important, we heard a stream of it throughout the presentations, and actually even in the presentation from Secretary Becerra, is this really need to focus on equity, on cultural context. You know, family caregiving is just so different, and in different communities, there are different cultural norms. People have a whole different set of resources. We heard a little bit of Secretary Becerra talking about some of his personal experience. I was just traveling the country and meeting with ACL's tribal grantees around some of their caregiving programs. And again, we need to be really sensitive as we're thinking about family caregivers to that cultural context, to really meeting people with the needs that they see, and recognizing that so many people just do not see themselves as family caregivers, even though that's the word we're saying, even though that's what they are doing. It's really, really different in different places. And the resources that people have make such a different experience in terms of family caregiving. So one thing as we're moving forward is we just have to make sure that our work is about supporting all families. It's about supporting all people with disabilities, all older adults, and all children who receive care. So really, really focus on inclusivity. The person and family-centered approach that we heard about, I think sitting in ACL, I'll just speak even from my own experience and talking to the many perspectives even within ACL, is this absolutely has to be what I call a both and approach. We must support family caregivers, and at the same time, our work has to be about respecting the self-determination and the goals and the wishes of the person receiving support. And it's really important that on these advisory councils, there are not only people who are family caregivers themselves, but that we have people who are themselves receiving care, and make sure that voice is really part of the work that we are doing together. The interconnectedness of family caregivers and of the paid direct care workforce cannot be understated. And so many of us across the federal government in our advocacy are doing work around both. And we have seen just the amount and what family caregivers have had to take on increase so much because we have this direct care workforce crisis. So I think that this is this incredible opportunity for us to bring together family caregivers, labor advocates, aging and disability advocates, and for us to focus on some of the many commonalities that we have in our advocacy. We've heard again and again, and it's just a point I want to emphasize throughout. Greg is going to get into this more. This is a start, not the end. We know we have put a great plan out there, but this has got to be a living document. The document we would have written even 2 years ago is really different than what we have now. And we're going to have to respond to the changes that happen on the ground, the political changes, the momentum. And so we're really going to need to think about this as our North Star to guide us, but with some real flexibility. And then finally, turning to what I am supposed to talk about, this is something that's going to take all of us. Alan just talked about It's about federal, it's about state action, it's about foundations, it's about advocates. There is a piece in this for all of us, and we won't be able to achieve the goals that are throughout this without all of us taking our pieces and moving together. So with that, I am going to talk about actually the federal government's commitment to improving services and supports to family caregivers, which is a big piece of this report. And just to hit home the scope of the problem, the magnitude of the challenges we face, 53 million family caregivers, more than 2.7 million grandparent caregivers, an unknown number of youth, kin, and other caregivers who, for a whole range of reasons, step in to provide supports. And we know these numbers are only growing. We have more and more people aging and wanting to age in place and stay in their own communities. And we have more and more people with disabilities who are really, really vindicating their civil right, who really want to stay and be part and be supported to be meaningful participants in their community. But these numbers are only part of the story. So we have to think about the context of the long-standing shortage of direct care workers, which has truly reached crisis proportions during the pandemic, and as I said, has put more and more strains on families and on people needing supports. We have the continuing opioid crisis and other factors that are, like COVID, that are creating new grand and kinship families every single year. We have, as we've heard from, again, a number of the presentation, so many families that don't have the knowledge and support that they need to adequately support another person. And at the same time, people who are providing care often lack access to meaningful respite that they need to just rest and recharge or to look after their own healthcare needs. And again, we've talked about the financial strains that are associated with family caregiving that often disproportionately land on women. This is a gender issue. This is a race issue. This is, really, really significant through that equity lens, these financial constraints. And it's this combination of lost wages and also for people who are able to continue to work, just having to turn down those opportunities for advancement. So that is why we need this clear and cohesive national approach to support family caregivers, because without them, the people they support would not be able to live the lives they want. Millions of disabled people and older adults would lose their ability to live in the community, and millions of children would enter the foster care system. So as Secretary Becerra said, this strategy will play an important role in these broader efforts that the administration has around strengthening the care infrastructure. So speaking on behalf of the federal government, it's pretty incredible. This strategy includes nearly 350 actions that federal government, federal agencies, 15 of us have committed to for the near term. Now, to say what these are and what they're not, the statute said, what are things that agencies can commit to within existing authorities, within your existing resources? So that's a lot to put on the table. We'll hear a little bit later, with more resources, with some changes in authorities, with legislative changes, we could do even more, but we can't wait. And it's really critical that we put these items on the table and that the public, that all of you hold us accountable to moving forward. These initiatives build on an inventory of federal programs and initiatives that we included in the first RAISE report to Congress last August. And again, the fact, as I said earlier, that government agencies across the entire federal government looked at all of their programs with the specific goal of identifying opportunities to improve support for family caregivers is really significant. And the fact that we were able to do that with 15 federal agencies at the same time is really, I think, notable. So I just want to give a few examples of some of the priority areas that the councils laid out and some of the examples of commitments, just to give you a sense of the breadth and significance from across the federal government. So one of the pieces that the councils identified is a real need to help caregivers obtain respite and other services. So a few examples. ACL will be funding a pilot of new respite services in states and communities. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, will be issuing a report that identifies ways that state Medicaid agencies have expanded access to caregiver supports and respite services under Medicaid using additional funding that was part of the American Rescue Plan, and this can help provide additional models for other states. And the Department of Veteran Affairs Caregiver Support Program will develop a tool to conduct a needs assessment for providers and practitioners to help identify and bridge gaps in existing VA services and resources. So that's one bucket, just some examples there. We talked about, and again, it's cut through so many of these presentations already, the real need to increase access to a well-trained direct care workforce to help supplement the care provided by family caregivers. I'm really, really excited to announce and sign up for ACL's listserv. So when we officially award this, you can get more details. But this fall, ACL will be launching a National Technical Assistance and Capacity Building Center focused on the direct care workforce. And this TA center will be curating best practices for recruitment, retention, and training from across the federal government and states, and will be working to support at the state and local level strategies around the direct care workforce by bringing together state Medicaid, aging, disability, and workforce agencies with key stakeholders. Another example in this bucket, our Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation, or ASPE, will soon be releasing research on state policies and programs to identify those that have the best potential for improving direct care workers' wages and compensation. And the Department of Labor will work with direct support providers to identify policies to improve funding and staffing for the direct care workforce. Another set of strategies that the councils identified is training professionals in person and family-centered care. So let me give a few examples on this one. CMS will create a caregiver module for the National Medicare Training Program and will update the discharge rule to include family caregivers in the hospital discharge planning process. That is work that comes directly from recommendations in this report. The Health Resources and Services Administration, or HRSA, will support its grantees and initiatives to train interprofessional teams to deliver person-centered care that includes family caregivers as essential members of the care team. And the Indian Health Services will develop a training program for caregiver coaches and supports by nursing and community health representatives. Financial security of family caregivers. We know that's really important. And so a couple things that federal agencies have committed to. Department of Labor's Women's Bureau will award grants to provide education to low-paid and marginalized women workers about their rights and benefits. And the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau will increase the use of financial education tools for caregivers, such as the costs of long-term care and how to provide them. Two other quick buckets I want to highlight, because again, these come directly from recommendations that this council has made. So outreach and identification of family caregivers, who we've heard again and again and again, who often do not identify as caregivers or know where to turn. The Indian Health Service will identify now family caregivers in their electronic health records. CMS will develop public messaging and outreach on family caregiving supports, such as durable medical equipment, respite care, home care, and hospice. And of course, ACL wants to contribute here too, and we'll be funding 5 to 7 states to embed family caregiver supports within state information and access systems. And then finally, you all talked about and said there's such a need to promote data and research on family caregivers to inform policies and evidence-based practices. So among the commitments, CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has committed to annually update and publish data from the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance Systems Caregiver Module and post that information on the Alzheimer's Disease and Healthy Aging data portal. And then finally, ACL will be providing funding for an analysis of nationally represented data sets and making recommendations for a standard set of caregiving questions to address family caregiver support across the lifespan with a goal of establishing a national caregiving data infrastructure by 2023. Those are just a few, a handful of the more than 300 commitments. And I hope when you take the time to read Appendix A of the strategy, you'll see that there are so many important actions proposed by the federal government. These are really important opportunities. And some of our next steps as working with the next RAISE and SGRG councils, we really to think about how can we identify which of these are the most impactful? What are areas where agencies can collaborate to increase the reach and the impact and the efficiency of the caregiving programs we all administer? So as a next phase of our work, beginning later this year, we will be working with NASHB, UMass Boston, and Community Catalyst to really analyze those opportunities for federal agency coordination and collaboration. And then, as I also mentioned, and Greg will get into more detail, starting on October 1st, we will have a 60-day comment period to collect feedback on this first national strategy. The public feedback has been so crucial, as y'all all know, starting with really the request for information when these two councils launched. We know we need to hear not only from each of you who are part of the council and the groups that we've pulled together, we need to hear from the broad public. We need to hear from every caregiver who's willing to share their voice. We need to hear from every person who is receiving care who is willing to share their voice. And that will help us and the new RAISE and Grandparent Advisory Councils, which will be formed later this year, determine how the strategy should evolve in these coming iterations. I just want to end by saying the development of the strategy is such a significant milestone in our national efforts to improve the way we support family caregivers. But again, this is just the beginning. It is a vision along with recommendations, but it is going to be up to us to translate this into action. So I am going to turn it in a few minutes now to Greg to talk a little bit about some of the next steps in terms of that. But I just want to say that, again, the input of family caregivers and the people they support is critical to our work. It is critical to making lasting change. And at the end of the day, again, lasting and meaningful change is going to require contributions and commitments from every one of us. I'm here on behalf of the federal government to say, anyone who's met me, anyone who's met our team, you heard it from Secretary Becerra, we are committed to the things we put down, and we are going to hold each other accountable, but we need your help. We need the public, we need private sectors, and we need every level of government to step up. ACL is incredibly proud to work with all of you to move forward these efforts on our shared goals. And we really, our mission is to make it possible for older adults and people with disabilities to live self-determined lives in the community. And everyone, regardless of age or disability, should be able to exercise that right. The work that we are doing here is critical to making that happen. It is critical that we see this as an important piece of strengthening the broader caregiving infrastructure and how it sits with our companion work to expand access to home and community-based services, to strengthen the direct care workforce, to keep continuing to advocate for paid leave and workplace flexibilities for more families. And of course, at the end of the day, we cannot make community living possible for everyone without the critical work of family caregivers. So thank you everyone for your incredible work to bring us to this moment. We are here as your partner. And with that, I want to kick it over to Greg.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you to the council co-chairs and Allison for really laying out such a fantastic overview of the 4 components of the National Family Caregiving Strategy, which, if you haven't already noticed, is now live on the ACL website. It is right on schedule, the agenda for the meeting today. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we will come back for a bit of council member reflection, and then to hear from our collaborating partners on some of the tools and resources that have been developed throughout the past 3 years that can really support us as we begin to implement the components of the national strategy. So we will take a break and we will reconvene here at 2:45 p.m. Eastern, and we will then resume with our agenda. So we'll take a short break. Okay, welcome back, everyone. It's good to see everyone again, and to continue on with today's agenda. I am so pleased to be able to have my other colleague, Lori Stahlbaum, join us and really talk with the council members for a little bit of reflection and discussion on their experiences, but also what they're looking forward to. You heard so eloquently earlier from my other key partner in this work at ACL, Sarah Markel, who does such a brilliant job with the technical writing. But I also want to thank Lori Stahlbaum for her incredible support of all of this work that we have done, for her vision and for her foresight. And so I know that Lori's got some questions and discussions that she'd like to have with you all for the next few minutes before we hear about some resources and technical assistance that's available for implementing the strategy. So Lori, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Stahlbaum. And so before we move forward with the next phase of the work of our council, the Family Caregiving and Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Advisory Councils, we wanted, as Greg said, we want to be sure we made some time to hear directly from our other council members today, not just the council co-chairs who did a phenomenal job, and so grateful for their leadership and their information they shared today. So back in 2019, when the councils first came together, in their introductions as new council members, each person talked about why they felt this work was important. And prior to today's meeting, we sent the council members 3 reflective questions so we could hear their thoughts about the culmination of their work over the past 3 years. Quickly, next slide, please. Quickly, because I know some folks have called in today and can't see the PowerPoint slides. I'm just going to read off the 3 questions we posed, which are: 1, for you personally, what are the 1 or 2 standout features of this initial strategy? 2, what do you hope is the intended outcome for the sectors addressed by the strategy? Or 3, as you look back, what do you hope will be your legacy from this work? This is significant work that's been accomplished by these 2 councils over the past 3 years. And we are truly grateful. So to the council members, if you would please use the raise hand feature that's available in Zoom, I will call on you in turn to respond to whichever question you like, or to comment however you'd like. And do please remember to turn your microphone and camera on when you are speaking. So let's get started. Oh, great. James, Martha, you're up first.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody. Thank you, Greg, and everybody for everything you've done. And it's bittersweet to be here for one last ride, maybe. And but it's also really gratifying to see what everything has come to since first meeting in 2019. So great job, everyone. And Greg had wanted me to remark on my personal experience being in the council, particularly as somebody who relies on care. I don't know how many of you have, I don't know how many of you are familiar much with me, but I have a disability. I was paralyzed from a accident a while back, and so I use a power chair, and I rely fully on caregivers for, essentially just about everything. And so it's a very special opportunity for me to be a part of this and get to hear the different perspectives of all the people on this council who have caregiving experience, and hearing what their experience has been like. And it's also been, I've been really proud to have the privilege to give my own input, just, because, we always see from our own perspective, but we don't always see fully what other people experience. And so I was glad to be able to be somebody who could be from the other end of the care, relationship, and just to be able to offer my own opinions and perspectives. So it's been real great, and everybody's been so good about taking everybody's opinions, suggestions, and considering them thoughtfully and giving respectful and courteous feedback. This has been a great example of what government can be when it's at its best, and what people can do when they, come together and, work for the best intention of a higher purpose. And so this has been a special experience. And for me, this council being a part of this council has stood out just because of the way it's so determined to be collaborative of the community outside of the council to get other people's opinion. And it's the wisdom that, there's no one size fits all, and having that awareness, and also having the goal of moving forward to make further changes. It's really encouraging. And it's really Greg had also, and I'll wrap it up now, but Greg had also asked me, to remark on why it's important to support caregivers. And I mean, it's something like, to back up like what's been said here often, is that caregivers give so much, and they're all human, and they have limits and points of exhaustion, so they need to be supported. And it's a big task to take on. And it's important to support caregivers because, like, it was brought up earlier that a lot of people will end up giving care or even receiving care, as much as we, don't like to think that, or, just think it won't happen to us, but can. And also, so, supporting caregivers now, like, could be directly down the road supporting yourself in some way, whether that's you needing the care or a family member needing it, or needing it for a family member. And so supporting caregivers is absolutely crucial, because we're all in this together, and we all know somebody we love who has that need. And yeah, thanks again to everybody who put the time in, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this. And I just implore you also to keep involving people who are care recipients on this council or in some other capacity. It's been really great. It's been really special for me to be involved in, and it's just, I hope that can keep on moving forward. So thanks.
Thank you so much, James. This means a lot. Thank you. Bet Hoxie, please. Oh, I think Bet may have stepped away. We'll go to Carol Zernial. Oh, Bet.
I'm here. I'm sorry. I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to put the camera back on. I knew I need to come off mute. So can you hear me now?
Yes, you're doing great.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
So it has been an absolute pleasure and an honor to serve on this committee as a grandparent, kinship caregiver, and as a professional who assists other families here in Maine with kinship issues. And if there's one intended outcome that I would love to see fulfilled, it would be that caregivers, whether it's strictly kinship caring for children or caring for family members on both ends of the spectrum, both senior and youth, I hope that the public awareness is increased through this activity, because I think that's one of the areas that families, particularly kinship caregivers who are caring for children, struggle with. They don't have the information of where to go first quickly enough. And so they're often already involved with the child welfare system or struggling on other ways to get recognition. And I don't mean that in a pat you on the back kind of way, but recognition of how to get resources and supports for the amazing work that they're doing as they caretake both children and sometimes their own senior family members. That would be my big takeaway from all of this, but every aspect of it has been amazing and definitely needed. And I look forward to seeing it unfold. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Beth. That's wonderful. Thank you. Carol Zernial, please.
Yes, thank you. I just want to again echo what an honor this has been. I mean, truly, as a professional and a caregiver myself, to be able to participate. And my hope is that as big of a canvas that we have painted on, that we realize it still wasn't big enough, it wasn't deep enough, and that the work has to be done. And I hope that our legacy is that we are each of us a pebble in someone's shoe, that no one, they don't get comfortable. No one is comfortable until we've implemented this plan, until we have recognized that we can't say we value all human life if we're not valuing self-determination and quality of life for persons with disabilities, for older persons, for family caregivers.
Thank you so much, Carol. That's wonderful. Diane Caradu, please.
Thank you. This has been a rare honor to be surrounded by so many talented people who put their hearts into this project. When we started 3 years ago and met, I wondered, having worked for the government for 30 years and seeing so many wonderful ideas fizzle out, that new priorities came in and all the work that was done on something was put to rest. And so seeing that we have now gone into new administration, a new congressional group, and still that this project is at the forefront, was really heartening, that we are doing something that many times I did not see in the past with different projects. One of the questions was, what do I hope the legacy from the work that we all did on this? And I am hoping that in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, that we can look at what the current strategy is and that we will truly see it was a living document and constantly put forward. And all of the entities have now bought into it. We put down strategies. We are hoping we have buy-in from all of these different sources that will provide the kinds of structure and support that the caregivers, the family caregivers, the grandparents will need in the future, and that this will then become the document that they can look to for their guidance, and that we will see in all states and in all areas that that support is there. And I thank everyone, and I thank Greg, an incredible leadership, the support from all of the partners that was gathered, writing the document, gathering information, being supportive. It was a wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. Joe Caldwell, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. So when I look back, I think my biggest hope was that this would bring together the aging and disability groups and the whole spectrum of caregivers. And I really think we accomplished that. I think the committee members really, I commend everyone for what I learned from the other committee members. And of course, the leadership, ACL and Greg and across the two administrations, really to keep this going. I think my takeaway, it's been said before, this is a first step, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm a little disappointed in the federal recommendations, and I don't think they go far enough, but I do think this is a first step in a good infrastructure. So I hope the work continues and there's more dialogue between the federal agencies and the non-federal members to come up with what I would say stronger recommendations. And of course, Congress needs to, that's one of the other big hopes, is that Congress really embraces this framework and not just, give it lip service, but really pay attention to the recommendations and respond in a bipartisan way.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Think back to Jaya's presentation on advocacy, correct? Charlotte Stevenson, please.
Good afternoon. At first, when this process began, I was a member of the Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Advisory Council as a grandparent raising a grandchild. And when we first started this process of combining the two groups and coming out with a general report, I was skeptical about it, simply because, for example, when it comes to a grandparent raising a grandchild due to substance abuse disorders, there's a stigma associated with that, as opposed to if you're a family caregiver helping or taking care of one of your family members, you're viewed a little bit differently, like maybe you're a hero. So I kind of felt like these two aren't going to match. But then as time went by, I started to see the similarities. And in my case in particular, I not only have a grandchild I'm caring for, but a mother with Alzheimer's disease. So there is a lot of alignment in our lives. And I would like to say that in terms of legacy, participating in this has opened so many more doors for me to advocate and opened up, opportunities for me to speak publicly and carry the torch forward. So there's a lot of benefit in participating in something like this. And I'm hoping that this is just the beginning, because we all know in our country, we have a crisis of care with respect to our healthcare delivery system, but we also have a crisis with fentanyl. And on a daily basis, how many more children are being left behind? So I'm hoping that with these new developments, since we began our process, we'll see a lot more energy and attention being paid to these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. We appreciate you. I just want to say we have 3 more people with hands up. We'll try to get to everybody. Gail Engel, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for having me. My name is Gail Engel. I'm member of the Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Council. As a grandparent raising my grandchild, I did it willingly, lovingly, and I felt I took it on ready to raise my grandchild with special needs. At the same time, I was also supporting my mother, my aging mother. I was also supporting my daughter with mental illness. And I wondered where my village was. I didn't have much of a village. For 16 years, I did this without any support. And so what this council has done and what this report has done is really look at creating that village and identifying who that village is. It's all of us. It is our community partners. It's our care providers. It's everyone that makes up that village. And I hope that my legacy would be that it's not just a book put on the shelf, that it is a living document, that it will carry forward and make things better for future families or who are caregivers. I really hope that this continues to be not just at our government level, our federal government level, but also in our communities, and that document continue to be worked on as we move forward. Again, it's been such a pleasure to sit on this council. I have appreciated all the support that I've gotten to be the voice on this council, and I most appreciate the fellow grandparents raising grandchildren on this council as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gail. Patrick Donovan?
Hello. Yeah, I'm going to mimic a lot of what some others have said, so I apologize for that. But I do want to give a huge thanks out to Secretary Becerra and the team at ACL, Lori, Greg, and everyone else that has just done a phenomenal job. I think not only organizing a lot of these meetings, but just making sure that we stay on task and are able to produce the reports that we have produced. I feel like Dr. Gibson and Ms. Lint really, when they were talking earlier, hit the nail on the head. I think they hit that nail enough times they could have probably built a house. But so one of the questions was, what are the one or two standout features of this initial strategy? So I'm on the Supporting Grandparents Raising Grandchildren Council, and I knew that when we started working on this, that there were going to be two councils that were kind of working on two different items at the same time. But I didn't quite understand when we first started what the Raise Council was doing. So, as we've come kind of full circle, I'm getting a much better idea of the other piece of the strategy and how important it is. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of grandparents and other kinship caregivers throughout the years, and I have I feel a pretty good understanding of how important some of the work that we're doing is. What I didn't realize was, again, the other piece of that, the Raise Council and what they were doing. I helped take care of my grandma when she had dementia when I was younger. So, I was exposed to that piece of caregiving at an early age. So I can certainly appreciate that. But one or two of the standout features that I kind of saw and coming into this was one that stood out to me in regards to the initial strategy really kind of had to do with the inclusion of a diverse group of stakeholders to provide input. I think this was critical in the initial phase in laying the groundwork for the council. I feel like this allowed insight and perspectives from caregivers experiencing gaps in service, while allowing the opportunity for other experts and advocates to share what sorts of services or programs they were aware of. Some members of the council are currently looking at new programs and I kind of feel like in a position to be able to take some of this information into consideration. I think this collective insight is crucial, not only identifying the gaps, but allowing, I think, some rich discussion on what may work and sometimes what may not work. So again, I just want to kind of mimic what others have said. I have really enjoyed sitting on this council, and I am looking forward to what it's going to look like in the future. I think it's easy. It's not too far-fetched to think that 30 years from now, we could look back at what we've done over the last 3 years And I think a portion of it's probably not going to be relevant anymore. I think we've seen so many changes in the last 3 years. To think maybe 30 years from now, it's hard to say. But what I don't think is going to change is a lot of the different things that these caregivers are struggling with, and some of the commonalities and the family dynamics that go along with that. I mean, there's always going to be caregivers, whether it's a kinship caregiver or whether it's somebody who is caring for an aging person. And I just really hope that we've laid what I believe to be a really good foundation for work to come. Thank you.
Our overtime. I'm muted.
You're fine, Lori. We can hear
Sorry?
you. We can hear you.
I think we've gone over time, Greg.
Okay, yes, yeah, we are, because we need to get on to the next part of the agenda, because we have, we're going to be joined soon by the White House. And so we want to try to be as respectful of their time as we possibly can. So thank you, Lori. Thank you to the council members who shared their perspectives. We hear you, we thank you, and you will soon, you will soon be seeing the fruits of your work, hopefully coming to fruition.
And just if I may, real quick, my apologies to those who I couldn't get to in time.
Yes. So we're going to move on to the next portion of the agenda, which is to hear about some tools for implementation and technical assistance. This entire work over the past 3 years would not be possible. It would not have been possible. We would not be where we are today without the incredible support of the John A. Hartford Foundation and their grant to the National Academy for State Health Policy. And we're also equally excited about the newly funded, what's about a year now, National Technical Assistance Center for Kinship and Grand Families. These two efforts have both over the past 3 years with NASHP and their grants supported the work that we've done, but we are also so looking forward to continuing to work with them, as well as the promise that the new TA Center for Kinship and Grand Families holds. And so we're going to be hearing today from Ronnie Snyder of the John A. Hartford Foundation, Wendy Fox-Grage at the National Academy for State Health Policy, and then Anna Beltran from Generations United, who will be sharing a little bit about the work that they are doing to support us as the national strategy rolls out and we look to the future of implementation. So Ronnie, I'm going to throw it to you, and with my incredible gratitude, with the incredible gratitude of ACL for your collaboration and partnership. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. That was quite a warm welcome, and it's right back at you. Those were some fantastic reflections. I'm sorry we didn't get to hear all of them because everyone was so valuable and such powerful work from both of the two councils. So I'm grateful to be here. So I am Ronnie Snyder. I am the Vice President for Program at the John A. Hartford Foundation, and I'm just really pleased to be here to share a few perspectives and a little bit of the history from our organization that is relevant to the way we move forward as well. With regard to the RAISE Act and the Grandparents Act, all supporting caregivers. Thank you. So just a couple of words about our foundation. We are a private philanthropy. We're based in New York City, but we operate nationally, and we were established by the family owners of the A&P grocery chain. Next slide, please. Our mission is to improve the care of older adults. So everything we eat, sleep, and breathe with regard to our professional lives is really around older adults. And we get to that mission through these three priority areas: building age-friendly health systems, supporting family caregivers, which is what we're here to talk about today, and improving serious illness and end-of-life work. And as you can see from this image, but you don't even need to see the image to know it, these are very much overlapping areas. We often say you can't support family caregivers if you don't have an age-friendly health system, or you can't have truly improved serious illness and end-of-life care if you're not incorporating those family caregivers who are so critical as a linchpin of care. Next slide, please. So these are our funding priorities in the family caregiving area. we work really hard to improve the ability of health systems and providers to identify and then assess and ultimately support those caregivers. We think a lot about how to raise awareness among the policymakers, the health systems leaders, the other funders, and the public broadly about the need for caregiver support. So you can really hear some of this RAISE work in our funding priorities. And last but not least, we're action-oriented. And so we're really interested in how we get to creating the large-scale change in partnership with national efforts. So here we are. Next slide, please. So our work in this area, at least our focused work that culminated in a program area around family caregiving, started with this National Academy's report called Families Caring for an Aging America. It came out in 2016, and these are just a couple of the top line takeaways from that report. So the focus needs to be on person and family-centered care. The fact that the support for family caregivers really has to be an integral part of our country's responsibility in caring for older adults. And there were 4 recommendations that made up this report. There were all kinds of fantastic findings and 4 primary recommendations, the first of which had a number of sub-recommendations. And that involved, the first one involved creating a national family caregiver strategy. So here we are. This is very exciting. All right, next slide, please. So through advocacy, the recommendation to form a national strategy to support family caregivers from the National Academy's report a couple of years later ultimately led to the RAISE Council and the strategy that we are discussing today. So, a few of the key points around this RAISE Council and this strategy are, family caregivers are by and large inadequately supported by the government, by the public, and by the private sectors across the board. So that support tends to be fragmented and siloed or inaccessible. The 2022 national strategy that we're talking about today is a whole of society approach to assist family caregivers. We've been hearing that throughout the day already. And the federal government has released this report of more than 300 actions that agencies can take, and it includes corresponding actions for states, for employers, for community-based organizations, and beyond. The strategy addresses caregivers' really foremost needs, and it's going to be updated regularly. We've heard that. This is super important. This is a living, breathing document, and it's going to improve things like our access to respite care. It includes family caregivers as a part of a person's care team. This is really important. And ultimately, it's designed to strengthen the direct care workforce that we've heard about a little bit, that Allison Barkoff mentioned, and to help ensure caregivers' financial security as well. So I just want to say, everyone here, whether you're on one of the councils, whether you're in the broader audience, all of us and every organization has a role to play in supporting that improvement for family caregivers by ultimately publicly promoting the strategy, and then as we work together, adopting the suggested actions. So next slide, please. I just want to briefly tell the story of how this grant came together, because I do think it's important, as I said, for the way we're going to move forward. In 2018, the passage of the RAISE Family Caregiver Act brought a new urgency and a new attention to this very important issue. And at that time, because we at the John A. Hartford Foundation thought this was so important and we wanted to make sure that it was successful, I reached out to ACL's senior leadership to ask how we could partner to make sure that the council would be successful, that it would bring in not only the council members themselves, but many other advocates in the field who've been dedicated to this cause for a long time, and to bring in all of that expertise. And ultimately, we developed this concept of the RAISE Family Care Act Caregiver Resource and Dissemination Center to both support and ultimately amplify the work of the RAISE Act's Advisory Council. We've added in the work of the Grandparents Council as well, because that's equally important. And We then came to the National Academy for State Health Policy, NASHP, which has a fantastic long history of working effectively in a nonpartisan way with federal and state policymakers and stakeholders to solve really complex policy issues. So NASHP has a great reputation, but more importantly has deep relationships with people who are senior policymakers across multiple sectors of state government and capabilities and resource development, as well as their communication. So it made NASHP uniquely positioned to lead this work. And we've worked together ever since. We've worked with other organizations that you can see here, the Long-Term Services and Support Center at UMass Boston, Community Catalyst, and the National Alliance for Caregiving are just among a few of them. And so the point I want to make here is that like our grant and our support, the development of the strategy itself was only possible because of collaboration. So collaboration with the council, collaboration with an additional faculty that were brought in to support the council, collaboration with other organizations that are mentioned here. And the strategy implementation will likewise require ongoing collaboration with the state governments, the business sector, advocacy organizations, and faith organizations. Next slide, please. So I just mentioned how important collaboration is. And we have seen, and we truly believe that philanthropy has an important role. Collaborating with philanthropy will support this strategy ultimately. So I wanted to say a few words about Grantmakers in Aging, which is the membership organization focused on aging funders. And they have what they call funders communities. And through those funding communities, Grantmakers in Aging, or GIA, as we say for short, convenes the funders who have a common interest to share promising practices and maximize impact. And there's a community around family caregiving. So I actually sort of brought this community together initially right in 2016 when that report came out. And now under Grantmakers in Aging, it represents over 40 funders who come from very diverse sizes and localities. Some of them are national, like our foundation, but others are state-based. Some come from smaller geographic regions, and everyone has a shared commitment to supporting caregiving through innovative programs and practices and policies. And I raise this because funding collaboratives don't just help funders. Ultimately, they're designed to help you. And that's whether the you is in community or in research or in any other area. It's about building and replicating programs, improving health systems, supporting policy. And so the example that I want to raise is that the Grantmakers in Aging Funders Collaborative is organizing around the RAISE National Family Caregiving strategy, the strategy we're talking about today. And with this release, Grantmakers in Aging will step up to track where there can be public and private, in this case, capital that will be deployed ultimately to advance the recommendations and to measure progress across the board. Next slide, please. So this is our call to action. I mentioned already, every single person, every organization has a role to play in improving support for caregivers. The national strategy now gives us a clear set of the kinds of actions that we can take. We can evolve with it. So put a stake in the ground, declare your actions, call on your network, step in, and ultimately, as you'll hear from our next presenter from the National Academy for State Health Policy, Wendy, there are a number of resources from their organization, our organization, and ACL. And I just want to end with the statement that I often say coordination is amplification. And that's what we're looking to do here. We want to amplify the message. We want to raise the work, and we want to support caregivers broadly everywhere they are. Thank you for that. And I'll toss it over to Wendy.
How about this? How about if I unmute myself? Hi, everyone. My name is, if we can have the next slide. My name is Wendy Fox-Grage. I'm a senior policy fellow, and thank you so much, Ronnie, and everyone. I want to say congratulations to everyone. What a big day, what an accomplishment. And it's been such an honor to be a part of this amazing private-public partnership with all of you. Next slide. My understanding is that we have the White House who's ready to join us. So I am going to cut my presentation in half so that we make sure that we've got time to hear from the White House, which is so exciting. Ronnie did such a nice job of explaining our organization. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that's all about state health policymakers and others. Next. And we're really excited to be a part of this entire endeavor because, as Ronnie said, at our organization, we host and operate the RAISE Act Family Caregiver Resource and Dissemination Center. This is a screenshot of our website, which you can go to at nashby.org. On the left side of bottom part of my slide, you can see the web address and all the resources and everything that I'm going to speed through in about 10 minutes. It's all on this website. Next. So we have been super busy, as you can hear from all the amazing presentations on the national strategy. We've been so busy with the council and others in supporting the council, the core partners, developing all kinds of state and federal resources, all kinds of papers, webinars, videos, blogs, and working with the states. Next slide. Okay, believe it or not, that is a photo from back when it all started it's the RAISE Council, the first and the in-person meeting before even the pandemic 3 years ago. And we've been with them every step of the way, providing notes, speakers, and everything that we've done with the council is published again on our website. Next slide. We were so excited to be part of both the initial report to Congress, which is what's on the slide, as well as this national strategy. So just an example of some of our work. In the RAISE Act, in the actual legislation, it calls for a Medicaid study looking into how it can better support family caregivers. NASHB conducted that study, and those findings, not only did we publish that study, but they're also included in the report to Congress. We worked very closely with the National Alliance for Caregiving to produce a series of videos and a series of stories from a variety of caregivers, and I'll show you that in a second. We also worked with our partners at UMass Boston and Community Catalyst in getting all those responses, over 1,600, and feedback from the public, and making sure that not only that was reported to the council, but there was a published report, and then that also was foundational. All of that information and research that goes into to the work of the council in these reports. Next slide. We also wanted to make sure, as we said, my organization works with state health policymakers, and we asked states, well, what do they really need in order to better support family caregivers? And then they said what they needed most was a roadmap, a state-specific roadmap on how they can do that. And so over the last 2 years, an entire team has been conducting state research, looking at different state strategies and promising practices. It resulted in 6 papers, not 1 paper, but 6. And the research from these 6 papers have gone into good old Appendix B of the national strategy on what states can do to better support family caregivers. So on the slide, here are 3 of the papers. And if we go to the next slide, here are the other 3 papers that we published. And again, they identify very innovative states, state innovations, and emerging policy strategies. Next slide. We're so lucky because we have a RAISE faculty of like the who's who in family caregiving. They meet with us quarterly. They review drafts of things. We run things by them. They provide guidance. And it's just been an honor and a thrill to work with them and have them guide this work. Next. Dr. Alan Stevens did such a great job explaining all the work that has gone into with our partners of hearing not only from family caregivers, but also from over 150 organizations of states, counties, employers, providers, and or different organizations. And every step of the way, we heard about the public, and all of that information, again, was presented to the council. It's in specific reports that are on our website, and all of that information has gone into and informed to provide the evidence base needed that has gone into the national strategy. Next. And here are two of those reports. So on the right, you'll see in their own words, those were the family caregivers' priorities and recommendations. And on the left, you'll see the other report, building a national strategy to support family caregivers. And that's all the findings from those stakeholder listening sessions from those 150 plus organizations. Next. Here are the faces of caregiving. So again, we worked with the National Alliance and NAC worked with and interviewed these 26 caregivers from all walks of life, different states, different caregiving situations, different cultural backgrounds. This really has raised the voice of family caregivers, and we've made sure that these videos are embedded not only in the previous report, but also are on our website, and I hear them in my head in all of the work that we do. Next. As I said, we've created a number of different papers and meetings and blogs, and here are two of them reporting on what the councils are up to, and as well as some of the promising practices from states such as Washington State. Next. NASHB, my organization, has an annual conference, and it was last week, and we were so thrilled that we were able to meet in person. It was in Seattle, Washington, and we devoted an entire day. We had more than 80 people attend an entire day summit on state solutions to support family caregivers and the direct care workforce. Not only were there state policymakers there, but others as well. Most were state policymakers, and the registrants were from over 34 states. So great synergy and excitement working on these issues. Next. One of probably the biggest features on our website that it's really one of our most popular items are these what we call interactive maps. So here's an example of 3 of them that deal specifically with respite care. You heard earlier from some of our presentations that family caregivers often need a break but can't access the services. So in these, we look specifically at Medicaid and Medicaid coverage of respite care. So if you're wondering what the state policies are in your state, go ahead and go on there and you can click on your state and learn about that. Next. And we're not only about creating resources, but dissemination. And this is just a sampling just from October to May of some of the places where we've given speeches at various different conferences. Just a heads up that now that we have the national strategy out, we're going to be focused this whole next year on dissemination and getting out the word. Next. And then finally on to implementation. This past year, we were able to work with states who, these 6 states in particular, they responded to an application we put out to states if they wanted to participate in what we called our Medicaid Institute on Family Caregiving. These states applied and were awarded a small grant to work on better supporting family caregivers. And just as, again, another teaser, next month, we will be publishing a brief that shows what these states were able to accomplish in terms of reaching out to other family caregivers, assessing family caregivers for their own needs, and increasing access to services and supports for family caregivers. Next. Okay, this is my most important slide, and that is, this is an ask to both not only the outgoing council members, of which it's been such an honor to work with you, but also to the over 200 people who are live streaming it and out there to the public. Our ask is this: we want to make sure that we do what the secretary has challenged us to do, which is to hit it out of the park, right? So let's hit it out of the park, and we need your help to hit it out of the park, right? So we first want to ask you to help us disseminate the national strategy. It's up, it's live, it's on the webs, on that ACL website. So please, right now, you can even send out an email to your colleagues, letting them know the national strategy is out there. You can, many of you I know are with organizations. Please get your organizations involved. Send out a press release, do op-eds, have them do an e-newsletter, and then there's wonderful social media. So create and get a buzz going on for us. Next, as Greg said, on October 1, there is going to be a public comment period. As you can tell from what we've all been saying, we really listen to you. That public comment, we encourage all of you to provide feedback, because we're going to take that feedback. The researchers at UMass Boston will analyze it. They'll present it to the new council. It'll come out in a publication as well. And then that will formulate us going forward with it being a live and working document so that we can improve it and update it. Then we want you to read the national strategy. There are 4 pieces to it. And we want you to read it for the action steps that your organizations and agencies can take. It's going to take us all. It's not just a federal action document, but it's actions for all of us. And so please read it, digest it, and take action. Finally, we want you to help us in participating and promoting it further. NASHB, so it's nashb.org. You can register. We're going to have a webinar on October 3rd to talk about the national strategy. So we invite you to participate and register for that. Also in November, it's National Family Caregiving Month, and we're going to have a variety of dissemination and implementation activities. For example, a Twitter chat. And so we'll get more information out to you, but we encourage you to stick with us, stay with us, and let's hit that thing out of the ballpark. With that, I'm going to send it on over now to Generations United.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Such a pleasure to be with you all. I hope you can hear me all right. My microphone's been giving me some trouble, but it's such a joy to be at this joint meeting, having been at the first meeting back in August of 19, and so appreciate that grand families and kinship families are part of the national strategy. So thank you. On the next slide, you will see that we use the term kinship families and grand families to mean the same thing, which is grandparents, other relatives, and close family friends who raise children when parents can't. And we're, again, so thrilled that they're part of the national strategy. So thank you. You'll see on this infographic that there are many more children outside of the foster being raised by relatives outside of foster care than within foster care, which I know you've discussed in committee meetings. And it's so wonderful that the strategy addresses all the children and all the caregivers. The reason these families, we promote them so much and we talk about them so much, their strengths and needs, is because children do better with these. Research shows that children do better with the relatives and kin than with non-kin because, you know, obvious reasons, many of which are common sense, connections to culture, but also things that are less common sense and that show that there are really good behavioral health outcomes, mental health outcomes, stability. These families stay together for a long time. On the next slide, you'll see that we are thrilled that we are running and we're about to celebrate our first anniversary here in just a few days. The first federally funded National Technical Assistance Center on grand families and kinship families. And on the next slide, you'll see that we do this in cooperation with the Administration for Community Living, and we thank them so much for their amazing partnership. We at Generations United, as you know, have been doing this type of work for over almost 25 years. And we have seen over and over how the systems don't talk to one another. And so how often will you go into a state or a tribe or a territory and for example, child welfare doesn't know that there's the National Family Caregiver Support Program on the aging side. So this is an effort to really help those systems, help those kinship navigator programs that connect caregivers and children to services and supports and other nonprofit organizations and assist them. So we don't assist the caregivers directly because those entities know their family laws, their programs, what goes on in the communities much better than we can at the national level. But what we can do is elevate really great things that are going on and help others replicate it. And that's what we've been busy doing. As you'll see on the next slide, we have a number of partners that we do this work with, and we're thrilled to have them all on board. Next slide, please. Also an array of subject matter experts that really have been working in kinship as long as we have in some cases. And most importantly, and I know a couple of council members are on here, those with lived experience who really are at the core of our work, even though they're not those we serve directly, they are at the core of our work, informing and guiding it. Next slide, please. So this past year has been very busy. We've had 53 individual calls with every state, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, District of Columbia. We had 6 convenings that were half day, and we learned a lot about the challenges and the strengths and the needs of these 8 agencies that I elevated earlier, of the 8 systems, 8 agencies, kinship navigator programs, the caregivers, and we have taken that and we are rolling out our technical assistance based on all that learning we did. So you will see on the next slide some of the things that we have learned during this time. So on the next slide, one of the things that we've known forever is that legal challenges are a big concern for these families, affording it the rest. So we've heard about some innovative practices, which we will be elevating and writing them up in such a way that others can replicate it, having learning collaboratives and the like. Next slide, please. Health and nutrition, huge issues, as you all know. And this is an area where the National Family Caregiver Support Program and the Native American Caregiver Support Program can have a huge impact. Next slide, please. Housing is a huge issue. I know you've discussed it in your councils. There are some wonderful programs out there, including this one, which is in New York City that you see the picture on the slide. There's one in Washington, D.C. There are a number of programs, and we're going to elevate those and write them up and create tools that others can use to replicate them so that we have more than 18 programs around the country. Next slide, please. Finances, as we all know, I mean, how can we expect caregivers to take on another child they didn't expect to raise, they didn't plan to raise? Where is the extra income, the extra money going to come to support their needs? Again, learning about really exciting practices around the country, which we will be elevating through our Technical Assistance Center and helping others to do similar things. Next slide, please. So how do we help? Well, as I mentioned, we've started all this work with a lot of talking, a lot of probing, a lot of finding out. We have now rolled out webinars. We had our first 2 webinars this month with Dr. Joseph Crumbly, one of our subject matter experts, and Dr. Terry Cross of the National Indian Child Welfare Association. We will be having more webinars in the months to come. We're going to be rolling out learning collaboratives. We respond to individual technical assistance requests, and you'll see there on that slide a link to the form to take you to it. And very exciting, we have a new website that just went live this week. And if you see on the next slide, that is the homepage of the new website. And it is on the next slide, you'll see the homepage. And it is that URL, which was on the last slide. And I know you'll be getting all these slides so you can see, but we have a number of resources here. And in addition to applying for a program or practice that you consider promising, that we can then elevate around the country. So you'll see there's an application for that at the very top of the homepage. Next slide, please. So please stay connected with us. We are going to work hand in glove with ACL and roll out this family caregiving strategy. And we're just thrilled to be part of the effort. Please sign up for our newsletters. And I will ask if I know that the White House will be joining us. So if anybody has any question though, until they're able to join us, I am happy to answer it. On the final slide, you will see that we are nicely supported by ACL, and we're just thrilled again to be partners. And I appreciate you all having me today.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here, for supporting the work of this of the council, and for everything that you're going to be doing to implement the national strategy. It is so greatly appreciated. Allison, I know Jessica is here, I believe, so I will let you introduce her.
Great. And I just want to add my thanks to the John A. Hartford Foundation, to Ashby, to Generations United, for your great work and for the work that we will be doing together moving forward. So it is now my privilege, as I said at the beginning, I think the fact that we have the Secretary of HHS and the White House joining us really shows the importance of this issue to the administration and moving forward some of our really important priorities around the caregiving infrastructure. And I am really privileged to introduce Jessica Schubel from the White House. Jessica is a health policy expert who has spent most of her career working on Medicaid policy. What do you need, buddy? She is a tireless champion for ensuring access to healthcare, including home and community-based services for all Americans, and particularly those for low income. Jessica serves as the director of the Affordable Care Act and Healthcare for the White House Domestic Policy Council. Previously, she worked on Medicaid and healthcare policy at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, as well as at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and at the District of Columbia's Medicaid Agency. ACL works very closely with Jessica in her role at DPC, and I can say from both my work with her at ACL and in our prior jobs, she is a huge champion for policies to advance community living and to advance priorities to support the caregiving infrastructure, family caregivers, and the direct care workforce. I'm so glad she's joined us today to talk about the administration's work to strengthen the care infrastructure, which of course includes supporting family caregivers. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jess.
Thanks so much, Allison, particularly for the kind words. I'm really excited to be here to talk about long-term services and supports, the critical role that family caregivers have in providing these services, and how the administration is committed to not only expanding access to Medicaid's home and community-based services, or HCBS, but also to supporting family caregivers. As Allison mentioned, I'm the director of the Affordable Care Act and Healthcare at the Domestic Policy Council. And in this role, I oversee the Medicaid and ACA, or private insurance portfolios here at the White House. I don't have any slides today, but what I thought I'd do this afternoon is talk about what the president has done so far to strengthen Medicaid HCBS through the American Rescue Plan and the administration's continued commitment to supporting family caregivers. President Biden believes healthcare is a right, not a privilege. And that is why he is committed to investing in home and community-based services under Medicaid. As you know, these critical services allow millions of older adults and people with disabilities to receive healthcare services in their homes and communities, rather than in nursing homes and other institutions. The administration recognizes what you all know, that your loved ones want to remain in their homes and communities to get the care they need, and that you, as caregivers, need more support. That's why the president is committed to ensuring a robust and sustainable HCBS system that supports both Medicaid beneficiaries and the caregivers that provide these critical services. One of the president's most impactful actions in the home care space was signing the American Rescue Plan, which provided additional Medicaid funding to states so they could not only expand access to these vital services, but also enhance and strengthen their HCBS program. My colleagues at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services have reported that states plan to spend $25 billion to accomplish these objectives. Moreover, we know that $9 billion is proposed to address workforce issues to help support the needs of family caregivers. The American Rescue Plan is also an important source of funding to support family caregivers. The COVID-19 pandemic has been challenging for all of us, but none more so than for family caregivers. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the challenges that you all and family caregivers have experienced over the last 2 years because of the pandemic, and the continued challenges we will collectively face as we work towards improving and strengthening the caregiving infrastructure. Family caregivers are a critical component of the care infrastructure, and the administration is committed to ensuring that family caregivers have the support they need. This includes making sure we're doing all that we can in our work with states to provide respite care for family caregivers. Respite care is critically important. We know that family caregivers need a break from caregiving. It's important to your well-being and mental health, which is why we're committed to helping states make these services more available. It also means making sure you have the supplies, equipment, and training that you need, not to mention working with states to ensure that family caregivers can get paid for caregiving work. I know we were all a little disappointed to see the president's proposals to strengthen the caregiving economy and infrastructure, that it didn't make it into the historic Inflation Reduction Act. But I want to assure you that the administration is committed to using all available levers to do what we can to strengthen our caregiving infrastructure and support caregivers like you all. This means taking a whole of government approach, which is reflected in this year's RAISE strategy. Over 15 federal agencies have expressed over 350 commitments on how they intend to support family caregivers. One aspect of this year's strategy that struck me the most was the acknowledgement that family caregivers come in all different shapes and sizes, so to speak. And by that, I mean, I was struck at how inclusive the term family caregiver is considered in the strategy. It's important to acknowledge and recognize the different composition of families and family caregiving, from family caregivers of people of all ages with disabilities and other support needs, to caregiving youth, an emerging population, to kinship and grandparent caregivers. It's a diverse population, and it's wonderful to see that reflected in the strategy. This strategy is yet another step in advancing the administration's goals in strengthening the caregiving infrastructure, and I'm looking forward to its implementation. Thank you all for letting me share the administration's priorities with you, as well as to express our continued support to family caregivers. Allison, back to you.
Thank you so much, Jessica, for making the time to join us and for really highlighting the priority that this work is, the commitment truly from the top of this administration. We really appreciate it. And I think we all will take to heart. We really need to think about in this whole of government approach, what is it that we can do? And we are really committed to finding those very impactful items and working together. So we are coming towards the end of today's meeting, but I think we might have just a couple minutes to go back to the few folks who may have raised their hands earlier before I get to do the privilege of doing a lot of thank yous. So why don't I start with, I think Catherine George's was one person who had raised her hand. Oh, and Lori, are you going to facilitate? Okay, awesome. You'll be even better than me. So I'll turn it to Lori and Catherine, turning it over to you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. And I want to say a special thank you, and I'm being very transparent in also saying that I was honored that AARP, on whose board I served for 10 years, recommended me for this council. It has been an eye-opener. I have seen the collective action of people and groups from very, very diverse sectors of this country. I want to say that my takeaways are, one, it is an initial strategy. And I think we need to think about that and do not expect that something that has been so deeply rooted or never been funded will immediately come to fruition. But we need to do, as they say with the big gorilla in the room, take little bites. I also, in regard to the sectors, I would love to see there an intersection of all these different sectors that have participated. The outcomes from that will be a collective action to move legislation, not just nationally, but also take a look at what can be done on the state levels to be assistive to family caregivers. And my legacy is that I was part of this. And my resolution, having been a family caregiver for 14 years, is I will make sure that I will make my communities and try to engage our communities, reflecting Black and Hispanic and older Americans, into making sure that something comes out of that for the benefit of caregivers. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you, Catherine. If we have time for another person, I believe Sonia Begay, actually, Sonia Begay was the next person with their hand up. Otherwise, Sharon Olson.
Yes, ma'am. I forgot to look at where the buttons were. Anyway, good afternoon, all. Thank you very much for having this wonderful gathering of these very, we talk about professionals, but everybody on this call has been very instrumental in taking care of and listening to the needs of our caregivers and also our grandparents raising grandchildren. And I applaud you all because it's a very, very serious undertaking that no one has ever done. My basis is that I really enjoyed also the collaboration, the people who basically have put themselves out there with sharing their stories and sharing a lot of things of the heartbreaks and happiness and things of that nature. And also, possibly just making sure that we're all unique in our own ways. But also on a side note, I'd like to thank you also for including the tribes, our Alaska Natives and Native Hawaiians. We don't look at them as much, and unfortunately, they just get kind of set on the wayside. So I do appreciate this particular strategy coming out because it opens up a door where it will basically for states and also the federal government to reach their hands out to the tribes. The tribes are more willing to work with a lot of people, but I think sometimes they just don't know, or maybe just not enough hands are out there to reach out to all of them. So yeah, thank you so much. And you guys rock. That's all I can tell you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Sharon Olson.
Well, thank you. I probably will not go into repeating. My fellow kinship caregivers have certainly laid out the story that we all share. But I've been at this 28 years, and being able to serve on this committee has really been a highlight, helping to elevate and bring greater awareness to the issues that grandparents and other relatives face on this journey. Hopefully we can reach more relative caregivers so they no longer feel alone, and provide them with some meaningful resources. And if we can, remove some of the barriers, or at least shorten them, that have kept some of the families under the radar and not even willing to reach out. So I want to thank you all for this experience. It's certainly been wonderful after many, many times that I was interviewed and it didn't seem to go anywhere. This does feel like it is moving forward and there is some momentum there. And I appreciate that. And I'd like to thank the staff for being so patient with me with my technical issues over some of the meetings. It's really been appreciated. So thank you all.
Well, Sharon, you know what we all think. We appreciate your time, and the technical issues were just something for us to work together to resolve. That's all. We're glad you were here. I think, shall we move on? The other, Jody.
Jody Sumaraki.
Sumaraki had, yes, was the last person with their hand up, but I don't.
Oh, well, I hate to, I don't have as much pep or energy, I think at this point, that some of the previous people did, but, I was just really going to say that, I work at CMS and was on this council to provide some of the federal perspective, and ended up over the course of the several years that this work has been underway, actually needing unexpectedly to have family caregiving services. Provided those services as well to another family member, and then watched multiple other folks in my family provide them. So all of that collective experience really kind of changed my perspective and the drive with which I participated, I think, as part of this council. And I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to participate and to hear so many stories, and to provide not only some federal perspective, but some personal perspective, and perspective on behalf of my family members, because, it really has resonated. And I hope, I guess a goal of mine really has been that people will see this and hear about this strategy and really start to see themselves in these shoes, because I just don't think, I think so many people think, oh, that's not going to happen to me, or, I'm not going to really have to deal with this. They don't want to think about it. And I think that it's so important for everyone to really realize that, if we live long enough, and this quote you'll see a lot, but if we live long enough, we will either provide family caregiving services, or we'll need them, or we might have to do both. And it just, I really feel strongly about the fact that we all need to recognize that, because it's going to take so much change and effort on so many levels to make a difference, and to make sure that people, when they are seeking out care and support for their loved ones and for themselves, most often during times of crisis, that it becomes an easier job to get that support, and that people don't have to give up their own jobs and houses and everything else to do that. So anyway, I really hope that it becomes that it stays a living document, that it evolves, that it becomes something that people reference all the time as something that helps drive change, and that we'll see in the future that it really was the impetus to a lot of change and action across our entire society. So I'm grateful to have been part of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jody, for those words. I think those are really a powerful place, for me, really, on behalf of ACL, on behalf of HHS, to really express our gratitude and our thanks to all of you. I want to truly thank each and every member of the RAISE and Grandparent Advisory Councils. Each of you brought just such an incredible level of insight and experience to this work that I think, as we have been putting this together as a group, that we had high expectations for this, but y'all, as Secretary Becerra said, knocked this one out of the park. I mean, truly what you brought to this, and hearing people's stories here. Actually, I kind of think back to January when we came together and we said, like, what do we hope to get out of this? And everyone gave a personal anecdote. People are bringing just so much personal passion and lived experience to this. And it is truly, truly in that document. I truly want to also thank the partners who have provided such crucial support to this work and helped bring people's personal experience to how can we turn this into policy change? How can we really make those levers out there? So thank you to the John A. Hartford Foundation, to the National Academy of State Health Policy, to UMass Boston Community Catalyst, National Alliance for Caregiving, and to literally the thousands of stakeholders and consumers, more than 100 organizations that contributed your talents and perspectives to the strategy. I want to thank each of the federal agencies that participated. I mean, Jody is evidence of, like, I can't tell you how many interagency things all of us get stuck on, and you're the representative and people are like, oh, another one of these. The passion and energy that people brought to this, and I have spent a lot of time trying to do interagency collaboration. It is just truly amazing. And I really want to thank the ACL team. I want to thank Greg and Lori and Sarah for like truly rolling up your sleeves day in and day out, listening, helping put this together. Our comms team, Christine Phillips. I know I'm forgetting someone because I'm ad-libbing and it's not in my script, but I truly, truly want to thank the team. And I want to thank really all of ACL for the contributions, for the perspectives. And I think we are really looking forward to leveraging all of ACL as we move forward in the next iteration of this, and really strategically connecting to not only what's happening across HHS, but how can we leverage the expertise we have across ACL in this work, from the disability community, the aging community, to the work we're doing on direct care workers. I am just so appreciative to all of you as the collective you for the work that we've done, the contributions. This is truly the first cross-government public-private partnership that's focused on improving family caregivers and supporting family caregivers. Your work has truly given voice and visibility to the needs of family caregivers, to the people who are receiving support, and I truly thank you for it. And then layer on top, as I've said in every meeting, you kept at it even through a pandemic. We could have gotten distraction, that this could have taken even longer, but instead you saw what was happening, and it really gave people momentum to adapt, to keep moving forward. And we did it virtually and people still managed to connect. Inclusivity, that was truly, I think I heard it in almost everybody's comments. And I just want to commend you for making inclusivity really the theme and the watchword, and making sure the strategy includes voices from people from all different types of caregiving relationships. Whether it's caring for a child, whether it's caring for a spouse, whether it's caring for an aging parent, and making sure we had the both and, that we are focusing both on family caregivers and the people they support, and making sure caregiver advocates and all their stakeholders see themselves and have a role in this. You truly came together and collaborated to develop actions for everyone. So no one has an excuse. We all have something to do. States and communities hold us accountable in the federal government, Congress. There's some stuff for you in there. Truly, there is something for everyone. And I think this is the perfect example. One of the committee members said it today. It's an example of what happens with the best of government. It's an example of what happens when we come together and we have a goal and we work towards it. And again, as we've said so many times today, this is just the beginning. We're not done. There is work ahead. Huge milestone. We have delivered the national strategy to support family caregivers to Congress and to the world. And your contributions are amazing, but we are going to lean in on all of you to help us with the heavy lifting that's ahead. So again, thank you. Your contributions will be felt for years and decades to come. It is just truly a privilege to be part of it. And with that, I will turn it to Greg. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. As it's plain to see, we have passion at the very top of our organization, and that drives down into everything that we do. And so, Allison, I just have to thank you for your incredible leadership and support in all of this. It's hard to believe that we're 3 years and 1 month, and we are at the end of this first part of our journey. A combined total of 15 council meetings, 2 joint council meetings, dozens and dozens of subcommittee meetings between the 2 councils over the course of the past 3 years and 1 month, and a pandemic. And we're at the conclusion of what I consider to be one of the most exciting chapters of our work to better recognize and support family caregivers. I want to just give you, before we close out and adjourn, I want to say my own personal thanks to the council members. This marks the end of your service as to the non-federal members. The feds, you guys are still on the hook. But to our non-federal council members, this marks the end of your service on these 2 councils, and we are so grateful to you for your service. We'll be communicating to you more about how we conclude all of that. But beginning tomorrow, our stakeholder partners, NASHP, the John A. Hartford, and a whole range of stakeholders will begin their outreach far and wide to promote the strategy. We have all of the materials now on the ACL website. The press release has gone out. So to any member of the public who is listening, please use these materials, promote the strategy, because all of this will lead up to the opening of the public comment period on October 1st. And if you haven't signed up for our ACL updates, please do that. Later this year, we plan to announce at public meetings of the new RAISE and Grandparent Advisory Councils, the seating of 2 new advisory councils, one for RAISE and one for grandparents. We have the nominees already in. We got those nominees earlier this year, and we are now working with a group of our federal partners from across the government to sort through the nominees and make selections for the next group of non-federal RAISE and Grandparent Advisory Council members. And so look forward to hearing more about that as we move into the next phase of our work. That's all I can say. I think it's all been said. I have an incredibly grateful heart today. As somebody who did the caregiving journey myself, many of you knew what I was going through on the day that we convened for the first time in August of 2019. I was in the thick of family caregiving. And this is the work that we've been able to accomplish means so much to me personally, professionally, and I know it does to all of you. So with that, I say thank you. The meeting is adjourned, and we look forward to our paths crossing again in the future. Thank you all so much.
You guys are awesome.
Thank you all.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank-
Bye.
Thank you so much.
It's been an honor.
Thank you.
A true honor.
Thank you.
Truly.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
You.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Going to miss it.